But first, it's been 41 years since a horrific domestic terrorist attack claimed the lives of 3 men in Rockland County. And tonight, as tradition, the community came together to never forget them. News 12's Jonathan Gordon is in Nyack and was at the ceremony. So, Jonathan, how does the memorial look tonight?
You know, it is really peaceful here tonight. The fresh flowers, it is all lit up. These beautiful wreaths are out as well. It's all part of a dedication. And just a couple of hours ago, there were several hundred people who were here to continue to pay their respects more than 4 decades later. 41 years have passed, but the wounds never fully heal.
I will never forget.
In 1981, this was the scene of a vicious gunfight after a group of left-wing radicals robbed $1.6 million from a Brinks truck at the Nanuet Mall. Brinks guard Peter Page was killed there. Trying to escape, the group then ambushed police by the entrance to the thruway, killing Nyack officer Waverly Chipper Brown and Sergeant Edward O'Grady.
Please continue to pray for our families and know that there's no parting from those we love.
Page's son Michael reminded the group it's critical to remember the way the 3 men lived as well as the way they died.
And their absence has left a hole in each of our hearts that can never be mended.
David Gilbert, who drove the truck, Kathy Boudin, who was a passenger, and a getaway driver, Judith Clark, have all since been granted parole and released. Decisions that continue to offend families and law enforcement alike. Police who spoke drew parallels between that attack and the difficulties some officers face today, arguing violent acts can happen at any time in any community.
We need to be as vigilant as ever to prepare our officers for the challenges they will encounter.
And the families added that this process never gets easier. The pain is still as fresh as it was 41 years ago, but they do, of course, appreciate the support. Ian?
Yeah, so Jonathan, how else is the village of Nyack planning to honor these 3 men?
In a really nice tribute that was announced, it sounds like it came as a surprise today. The village here in Nyack announced that they do plan to rename part of Lydecker Street, which runs right alongside Village Hall, and they plan to rename it after the fallen officers and, of course, that security guard by the end of this year. We're expecting more details to come before the year is up. Here in Nyack, Jonathan Gordon, News 12.
More breaking news tonight. The FBI says it stopped a plan to bomb several places across L.A. on New Year's Eve. Officials say 4 people who were arrested over the weekend in Lucerne Valley, where the FBI says they were preparing to test explosive devices ahead of the attacks. Fox 11's Laura Diaz joins us now live from downtown L.A. with more on this story. Laura.
Yes, Susan, organized, sophisticated, and extremely violent. That is how prosecutors describe this alleged plot. As you just mentioned, it was supposed to take place on New Year's Eve, they said, and they went on to say that it would strike very close to home.
The individuals were arrested on Friday, December 12th, when the group attempted to construct and detonate IEDs out in the desert.
The FBI says this video Friday in the Mojave Desert shows homegrown terrorists moments before they detonated a bomb. Investigators say it was a test for 5 planned simultaneous New Year's Eve bombings at Southern California corporate locations at the stroke of midnight. According to the U.S. Attorney, the suspects are an anti-government, anti-ICE network operating under the code name Operation Midnight Sun.
She said, quote, "What we are doing will be considered a terrorist act."
The exact U.S. companies that were targets were not disclosed Monday, but details of how they hope to execute the lethal plan were. Investigators allege the bombs were hidden in backpacks and marked with graffiti. That by attacking at midnight, they planned to go undetected as holiday fireworks shows provided cover. FBI bomb technicians confirmed the step-by-step recipes for black powder pipe bombs likely would have worked. The 4 L.A. residents arrested were alleged members of an extremist group called Turtle Island Liberation Front. 30-year-old Audrey Carroll, 32-year-old Zachary Page, 24-year-old Dante Gaffield, and 41-year-old Tina Lay. all face charges of conspiracy and possession of an unregistered destructive device. Retired LAPD Deputy Chief Mike Downing, who headed up the anti-terrorism task force, told me what really bothers him is the apparent burgeoning homegrown network.
The danger is that they're sharing ideologies, they're sharing resources, they're sharing training. There's no, the pure ideologies seem to be mixed bags, so to speak. And I think that's dangerous.
Nearly 8,000 miles away, the attack on Hanukkah celebrants in Sydney, Australia, that left 15 dead are a stark reminder of fomenting hatred.
The best eyes and ears that we have is the human ring of steel in all of our communities that are strong, and to keep those communities strong.
Prosecutors say that the plot didn't end there. There was a follow-up attack planned in the new year to attack ICE agents with pipe bombs. In downtown Los Angeles, Laura Diaz, Fox 11 News, sending it back to the studio. Susan?
News 15 investigates, uncovering new information about what led to the FBI arresting a New Iberia man in a terror attack plot, and we're getting an exclusive look at the raid on his house.
FBI agents say the former Marine and New Iberia police officer was part of an anti-government group planning attacks in Los Angeles and New Orleans. News 15's Dracar Francois joins us from New Iberia with a look at what else we're learning tonight.
A former New Iberia police officer with alleged ties to an extremist group is behind bars, accused of planning an attack.
Feds and the ATF blocked off the street, lots of cars, lots of lights.
Neighbors here on Leona Drive in New Iberia, just as they were headed to bed, saw federal agents raid the home of this person, Micah Legnan, a former Marine known on social media as Kateria the Witch. Legnan was arrested by federal agents on December 12th on Highway 90, allegedly on the way to New Orleans with an assault rifle. The same day, 4 members of an alleged extremist group known as Turtle Island Liberation Front were arrested in California. According to a criminal complaint obtained by News 15 Investigates, the feds say they were testing explosives for a New Year's Eve attack, and Legnan planned to target ICE agents in New Orleans. The charging document shows an alleged group chat between Legnan and the 4 Turtle Island members on the messaging app Signal. The arrest has come as a shock to Legnan's New Iberia neighbors.
I don't know. He never spoke to me. I never had any conversation personally with him, but he did seem quiet. They didn't seem to bother anybody. Maybe that was their way of laying low.
The charge against Legnan stems from this social media post referencing ICE and the Waco standoff 32 years ago, in which 4 federal agents and 70 members of a religious group died. The feds allege the post is an implied threat of violence against federal agents. The New Iberia native was hired by the New Iberia Police Department in August of 2019 after being honorably discharged from the United States Marine Corps. In May of 2022, he was placed on administrative leave for unknown reasons and resigned 4 months later. Now, Legnan is behind bars, facing federal charges.
I'm really happy that they were on top of it. They did their job. They kept our neighborhood safe, and hopefully they'll keep doing such a good job and keep the traffic down. And I'm just so grateful that they didn't succeed with what they wanted to do, because, oh gosh, that's just awful.
In New Iberia, I'm Dracar Francois for News 15.
Katherine, Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Gus T, Renegade, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the global system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, December 19, 2025. So I have been told. This is our 4th installment on William Rosenau's Tonight We Bombed the U.S. Capitol. We are picking up Chapter 9, about midway through Chapter 9. The installments that we heard, kind of referencing some of what we heard last week, and even some very very current events. But last week we talked about the Brinks armor truck robbery, where you got enforcement officers killed. One of them, privileged black male Waverly Chipper Brown. Talked about that last week and saying, hey man, if it's going to be some counter violence, make sure no black people, non-white people are going to be harmed. That's what we're supposed to be trying to get rid of racism for, to stop violence being committed against non-white people. So it shouldn't be reproducing any of that, calling ourselves getting rid of that problem. Anyway, but they just, or not just, but just within the last couple of years, they had the memorial to recognize the killing of Mr. Waverly Chipper Brown. I thought it was significant. His nickname is Chipper. Black people, victims of racism, don't have a lot to be chipper about. I've noted that as well. A lot of times we'll have those smiley and that sort of thing. They'll give us those sort of nicknames, so-called Mr. Waverly Brown. But they had a ceremony to recognize him, and they talked about some of them white people. I need to see all the people that were accused, convicted of participating in this robbery and killing. But they said that a lot of these folks, are no longer in greater confinement. We heard that last week. Man, I'm just... H. Rap Brown died in prison. Mumia Abu-Jamal still in prison. I don't think Mumia Abu-Jamal, he didn't bomb anybody and he didn't rob no bank. So if you can let out some of these other folks who were convicted of killing a cop or several enforcement officers, certainly you could release Mumia Abu-Jamal. Then we heard, well, that's why I say current events as well. So the so-called Turtle Island Liberation Front, they had been planning some sort of bombing that was supposed to happen on New Year's Eve. So that's like, what, 10 days? 12 days from now? This is supposed to go down. They were out testing their devices. It says they were arrested out in Lucerne. I thought they might sue Africa type of a thing. And even this sort of thing, if you remember, there was a bombing, I believe it was 2021, maybe 2020, right at the end of 2020, where there was a bombing in Tennessee, where they set off a device. It was right at the end of the year, close to Christmas, and it knocked out cellular phones for like thousands of people. They lost, and I think it was right near one of the major phone towers where this IED detonated. But they've had lots of this, and I think even it continued where they were having attacks against some of the electrical grids and such. New Year's Eve, end of the year, Christmas, all of that sort of thing, and that's a whole part of that. The Boogaloo. And we're going to deliberately try and shut down the grid and get our assault rifles, and then we can go and have havoc and probably kill a lot of non-white people. This just happened, like I said, within this week. This just happened, literally. I said they were organized, sophisticated, violent. Remind me of the folks that we're talking about right now, M19. And then they said they arrested Micah Legnon, Legnon. This is a suspected racist in Louisiana. The first group that's over in California, this is in Louisiana. And I guess they're coordinated, working together, and they got messages online and what have you. And Micah Legnon with this Turtle Island Liberation Front said he was a former enforcement officer and Marine. They got all those reports talking about so-called extremism in the armed services. There you go. As well as in local police departments. Big problem. And even that goes all the way back. Mark Furman, I believe he served in Vietnam. Anyway, but and they said Micah Legnon influenced by what happened at Waco all those years back. I said, what in the Tim McVeigh? That is right out of like Turner. He was there with the Turner Diary. Really, all of this is right out of Turner Diaries. We've heard all of this before. Tim McVeigh, Eric Rudolph, and they use that word extremist. Is that a synonym for racist? I know they might say that this is, Antifa. They might say that these are, hey, we are white people who are not racist, and we're going out. They say we're going to attack ICE and that sort of thing. We're Turtle Island liberation. Yeah, we want to give back to the indigenous. They could say that, I guess, say that we are the spawn of the John Brown anti-Klan group. White culture looks strikingly similar, especially if you take a good look at just the same patterns. They just do the same thing. Go to Vietnam to bomb and kill, and then come back here and say, I'm against all that. I'm going to still do some bombing and killing. What does it mean to be white? Any of the white people in this book not racist? We'll think as we read. Katherine Massey Book Club, Tonight We Bombed the U.S. Capitol, audio segment 1.
Denton and his Senate allies insisted that the terrorist threat wasn't confined to the actual trigger pullers and bomb throwers. For terrorists to operate, they needed above-ground helpers, and, according to Denton, members of the overt and front groups can aid and abet acts of terrorism or armed struggle by locating targets, carrying out intelligence gathering, and providing logistical support. The senator didn't stop there. He claimed that there were all kinds of enablers, equally threatening. When I speak about a threat, I do not just mean that an organization is or is about to be engaged in violent criminal activity, he said. There was also the peril posed by the support groups that produce propaganda, disinformation, or legal assistance that may be even more dangerous than those who actually throw the bombs. The implication was clear. Fighting terrorism meant casting a wide net. Nonviolent groups could be part of a broader web of subversion. In a 1983 Senate report, staffers cited the work of Philip Selznick, a former RAND sociologist, to shed light on the slippery concept of subversion, what Selznick called the manipulation of social institutions for alien ends, this manipulation being conducted covertly in the name of the institution's own values. Subversives, Denton said, weren't necessarily criminals. Nevertheless, they had to be fought. They were the enemy within, working covertly to destroy the system. Denton decided to name and shame. He called out 3 prominent leftist institutions, Mother Jones Magazine, the National Lawyers Guild, and the Institute for Policy Studies. Another subcommittee member, Senator John P. East, a North Carolina Republican, called for deeper probes into America's subversive realms. We ought to know who these people are and what they are up to, he said. In Reagan's America, plotting to overthrow the government wasn't going to be treated as 1960s-style fun and games. If the administration was correct, all terrorists had at least some foreign ties. And if those ties weren't readily apparent, they'd have to be uncovered. It was war against the state, and it was time for the state to hit back hard. The terrorism hardliners insisted that the FBI needed to be unleashed. J. Edgar Hoover's views on crime, dissent, and subversion dominated federal law enforcement and domestic intelligence gathering for nearly 50 years. Although every president from John F. Kennedy to Richard Nixon considered sending the FBI director into retirement, Hoover remained in office until his death at age 77 on May 2, 1972. His New York Times obituary described him in his declining years. The once ruddy face was puffy and pale. The brushed-back gray-brown hair was straight and thin, not the wiry dark curls of a few years ago. He walked stiffly, although his figure was trim and erect. Behind his glasses, his dark brown eyes looked fixed, and he seemed to be daydreaming. During the Great Depression, as colorful crooks such as Ma Barker, Pretty Boy Floyd, Machine Gun Kelly, and Bonnie and Clyde roamed the American landscape, Hoover worked to secure the Bureau's reputation and image as the nation's premier crime-busting force. Through movies, radio, press accounts, and eventually television, his masterly campaign shaped the public's imagination. Hollywood called Hoover's agents G-men, that is, government men. Ever vigilant and incorruptible, and using the latest crime-fighting technologies, the Bureau's special agents were on the front line, battling the nation's criminal multitudes, bank robbers, car thieves, grifters, joy boys, dopers, white slavers, and the agency's size and resources grew along with its prestige. What had been founded in 1908 as the Justice Department's Bureau of Investigation was by 1935 the Federal Bureau of Investigation. During the Second World War, the Bureau rooted out Axis spies. It was classic counterintelligence work. And although the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, the predecessor of the CIA, was supposed to be in charge of intelligence gathering operations overseas, the wily Hoover, a consummate bureaucratic operator, managed to outmaneuver the OSS chief, General William Wild Bill Donovan, and grab responsibility for espionage in the Western Hemisphere for the Bureau. After the conflict ended in 1945, the FBI continued its war on crime, with Hoover constantly refreshing the image of the Bureau's agents as the nation's crime fighters supreme. And Hoover expanded the Bureau's clandestine portfolio. Special agents kept tabs on the so-called lavender lads who were supposedly cavorting in the nation's homosexual netherworld and enthusiastically corrupting civil servants, politicians, and military men and women. Gossip about Hoover's own sexuality persisted for decades, including claims that he liked to dress up in women's clothing, participated in homosexual orgies, and was married to a top aide, Clyde Tolson. Many of those rumors, including those spread by some of Hoover's liberal opponents, have a strongly homophobic undercurrent. Moreover, absent any definitive evidence, the truth is unknowable. In 1950, U.S. Senator Millard Tydings claimed that the State Department was overrun with sexual perverts, and that same year, Senator Kenneth Wherry claimed that as many as 3,000 homosexuals were employed by state. In 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower issued an executive order banning federal employment for anyone engaging in any criminal, infamous, dishonest, immoral, or notoriously disgraceful conduct, habitual use of intoxicants to excess, drug addiction, sexual perversion. The lavender scare was on, and thousands of Americans would lose their livelihood and endure public and private humiliation. Hoover worried about the country's growing civil rights movement. It posed a direct threat to the white-dominated racial order Hoover supported with enthusiasm. He also hated the Ku Klux Klan, not so much for its poisonous beliefs and its reign of terror against African Americans, but for its temerity in challenging government power and authority. But in the director's view, the main internal threat was the Communist Party USA. During the 1930s and early 1940s, the United States had been crawling with Soviet spies. Moscow's center directed intelligence networks made up of hundreds of American citizens. Moscow's U.S. spies were in the State Department, the Office of Strategic Services, and the Treasury, in the defense industry, and in the most important target of all, the top-secret Manhattan Project, which produced the world's first atomic bomb. Overt party members and communist supporters and sympathizers, fellow travelers and comsimps as they were called, helped marshal public support for Uncle Joe Stalin, a crucial U.S. and British ally. During the war years, none of this attracted much of Hoover's attention. As the Cold War began, the American Communist Party was already in terminal decline. Reds, foreign or homegrown, had about as much popular support as a plague of measles. Soviet intelligence continued its operations in the United States, but the pool of dupes, stooges, comsimps, and true believers available for espionage and subversion was drying up. Hoover didn't see it that way. With the full support of Congress, the executive branch, and most of the media, universities, and trade unions, the director doubled down on rooting out the enemy within. Hoover began gathering intelligence on U.S. citizens, not so much for the purpose of investigating federal crimes, the FBI's nominal mandate, but to disrupt organizations and movements he deemed antithetical to American goals, values, and security. It wasn't the first time for Hoover. During the so-called First Red Scare of the 1920s, the young Hoover had been a tenacious hunter of Bolsheviks, anarchists, and labor radicals. During the Second Red Scare in the late 1940s, Bureau agents tapped phone lines, spread disinformation, and conducted surreptitious entries and black bag jobs to install bugs and carry out warrantless searches, all in the name of domestic security, an all-encompassing but vague mission. Over time, some Bureau men, the ranks of special agents were all male until 1972, when the first woman was admitted, came to see such activities as dubious, sleazy, and at odds with the squeaky clean G-man culture and image Hoover had fostered since the 1930s. By the mid-1960s, even some of the director's senior lieutenants were worried about the questionable legality of some clandestine FBI operations. "We do not obtain authorization for black bag jobs from outside the Bureau," top Hoover aide William C. Sullivan wrote in a July 1966 memo to the director. "Such a technique involves trespass and is clearly illegal. Therefore, it would be impossible to obtain any legal sanction for it." But the break-ins and bugging continued. President Richard M. Nixon came to power in part because of his promise to crack down on campus revolts, ghetto rebellions, and left-wing extremism. Hoover was on board with Nixon's get tough stance. Hairy hippies, acid heads, champagne socialists, pro-North Vietnam protesters, they were the antithesis of everything Hoover believed in. For the director, SDS and then the Weathermen were particularly abominable. Enjoying every advantage of American life, these privileged and pampered radicals sought not just the destruction of the Republic, but the victory of communism worldwide. In 1970, the FBI announced the largest manhunt in Bureau history. But the Bureau's hunt for weather people would be largely futile. None of the big weather fish was caught. The Bureau tied itself in knots in a search for fugitives that employed questionable, if not outright criminal methods, including warrantless searches and eavesdropping. "Even though we had hundreds of FBI agents looking for them, they couldn't find the fugitives," said retired FBI agent William E. Dyson, Jr. "Weather people were more sophisticated than we gave them credit for," he conceded. "They were more than a bunch of college kids." In the end, most of the weather people who had been underground surfaced on their own accord. Those who faced outstanding earlier charges, such as those stemming from the Days of Rage, were often able to get them dismissed. Nobody went to jail for any of the Weather Underground's bombings. There was major fallout from the Weatherman hunt. Top FBI officials, including former Deputy Director Mark Felt, would be prosecuted for illegal surveillance. Felt later tried to explain his actions as a necessary response to the politically motivated violence that saturated the American landscape during the late 1960s and early 1970s. There were dissidents who talked of kidnapping Dr. Henry Kissinger and visiting heads of state. There were plans to paralyze the nation's capital by widespread sabotage. Policemen were being ambushed and murdered. Hundreds of bombs were exploding all over the country. Felt publicly confirmed in 2005 what many insiders, including Richard Nixon, had long suspected, that he was Deep Throat, the Watergate source for the Washington Post's Bob Woodward. Felt was right about the scale of violent extremism. In 1971, there were more than 400 terrorist attacks in the United States. But congressional probes and revelations in the press about illegal domestic snooping had tarnished the FBI's image. The political climate had changed, and much of the public had lost its appetite for rooting out subversives, radicals, and bomb throwers. The FBI's budget dropped, and the number of special agents shrank. In 1976, Attorney General Edward Levy, who, as the president of the University of Chicago, had resisted Saul Bellows' entreaties on behalf of Judy Clark, issued a directive known as the Levy Guidelines. For the first time in its history, the FBI was compelled to operate under a set of Department of Justice rules about domestic security investigations. The number of security-related probes plummeted. As of March 31, 1976, the FBI was conducting 4,868 domestic security investigations. 2 years later, the number was down to 102. The FBI could investigate terrorists. Indeed, the Bureau was the federal agency with the lead responsibility for incidents involving attacks on U.S. citizens. But there was to be no more political snooping. From now on, the focus had to be on prosecution of federal crimes, such as bombing, bank robbery, and kidnapping. In April 1981, Reagan pardoned Felt and another former Bureau official. the pardon signaled that the handcuffs were coming off the FBI. But in the eyes of administration officials and the members of Denton's Senate subcommittee, the Bureau was dragging its heels. It wasn't spending much of its budget on counterterrorism. With the exception of the New York field office, the Bureau didn't seem particularly aggressive in pursuing terrorism cases. Maybe it was the hated Levy guidelines. Members of Denton's committee complained about them endlessly. Maybe the Bureau had simply failed to comprehend the threat posed by America's homegrown bombers and their support networks. Or maybe the FBI as an institution was gun-shy when it came to investigating terrorists. Before long, the FBI would double down on leftist terror, but not because of congressional moaning or administration prodding. The botched Brinks job caught the FBI off guard. It hadn't been staying current on the activities of the ultra-left. As far as the Bureau knew, that kind of extremism had disappeared with the Weather Underground. But the extreme violence and ensuing headlines instantly put the family on the FBI's radar, and special agents immediately started investigating. Specters from America's recent radical past had managed to reanimate themselves. The Brinks investigation, which the FBI called NIROB, began uncovering a sophisticated and clandestine national network of domestic terrorists, said Kenneth Maxwell, the FBI's top man on the case. With Brinks, the FBI's inhibitions regarding domestic terrorism evaporated, wrote one former Bureau historian. There was no need for the FBI to be concerned about being seen as political. The Brinks perpetrators had committed serious crimes, including armed robbery, conspiracy, and murder. They were cop killers. Nobody was being investigated for his or her political beliefs. This was a straight-up, coast-to-coast criminal investigation. With that, FBI Director William Webster made counterterrorism a top-tier priority, right up there with catching foreign spies and locking up mafiosi. Webster said that the Bureau wasn't going to be outgunned by terrorists, or by any other criminals for that matter. He created the Hostage Rescue Team, or HRT, an elite unit of anti-terror action men. The HRT, he said, had a whole range of skills that other agents would not be readily trained for, and could be more effective in a problem that was bigger than the local SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics Team, could handle. Webster wanted more law enforcement cooperation. Bureau men and state and local police had worked together in the past, but it had been on an ad hoc, case-by-case basis. One crime, one investigation, and then they'd part ways. And when they were forced to work together, there was serious tension between the FBI and its state and local counterparts. Cops often regarded the Bureau as self-aggrandizing, and some FBI officials saw state and local police as unprofessional, failing to meet their own high standards. But Webster ordered his agents to start treating state and local police as colleagues. Henceforth, they were to be the Bureau's partners in the fight against terrorism. In 1979, the FBI and NYPD created a standing task force to investigate the string of bank robberies that had plagued the greater New York area. A year later, they set up the first Joint Terrorism Task Force, or JTTF, with 11 cops and 11 FBI agents. Instead of squabbling among themselves, they'd pool information and work together on terror cases. NYPD members became federal marshals. That way they could get security clearances. The model has endured. Today, JTTFs all over the country handle terrorism investigations. NIROB was the JTTF's first big case, and NIROB would lead the Bureau to May 19th. Members of the family had left behind a significant paper trail. In the Barker Avenue safe house in the Bronx, the FBI and NYPD found the floor plans of New York and Brooklyn police station houses and the family's hit lists of police officers being considered for assassination. During the searches, they also found tape recordings. It was a gold mine, an investigator said. When these people are underground, one of them invariably thinks he or she is going to write the new Das Kapital. So they write every damn thing down, and sometimes they tape it all. You'd think they would have learned from Nixon. What's more, the cops were on to Materi Sonny Sundiata, whose car had been seen circling the block outside 590 East 3rd Street not long after the robbery and shootout. On October 23, 1981, the NYPD spotted a car in Queens. The license plates matched those of the car seen in Mount Vernon. Sonny was in the car, along with Odinga. A wild 20-minute car chase ensued. Abandoning their vehicle in the Ozone Park neighborhood, the two men opened fire on the cops. Sonny climbed a fence, but not quickly enough to avoid the police gunfire that killed him. Odinga's pistol jammed, and he opted to surrender. Odinga would serve 33 years for the Queens shootout and his role in the Brinks conspiracy. After he was let out of prison in November 2014, a longtime supporter said, "I think you can compare it to Nelson Mandela being released." The FBI's lead Brinks investigator, Ken Maxwell, had a different take. Comparing Odinga, a hardcore felon, to Nelson Mandela is the theater of the absurd and an insult to the legacy of Mandela. If you think this lifelong domestic terrorist, self-proclaimed revolutionary, and convicted cop killer is going to be a contributor to the betterment of society, you are delusional. Investigators also discovered that Eve Rosan was the owner of the Honda, and witnesses said she was the woman who had rented the red Chevy van. On October 27th, she was arrested without incident for criminal facilitation. The police also found a set of Linda's prints on a map inside the Honda's glove compartment. The hunt for the Brinks conspirators led the FBI to discover that May 19th was an extremist group distinct from the family. 10. If not us, who? May 19th tried to salvage something from the upstate debacle. An above-ground member, Dana Bieberman, offered a public defense of the Brinks operation and the killing of the cops and a Brinks guard. People who defend imperialism do so from their own choice. That is a choice that they must live or die with. Under the name Revolutionary Armed Task Force, they issued a communiqué announcing that Black Revolutionary Freedom Fighters and North American anti-imperialists had joined forces. Brinks wasn't a robbery. It was an appropriation to raise funds to fight the fascist approach to genocide waged by the white ruling class. The struggle would continue, the task force vowed. The communiqué didn't seem to win anyone over to the cause. Nor did the on-air performance that May 19th above-ground members Mary Patton and Donna Borup gave later on WBAI, New York's venerable left-wing radio station. What happened on October 20th was not a robbery. It was not a criminal act, Patton said. When asked about the Brinks victims, Patton argued that they'd had it coming. To choose to be a cop, at this time in the history of the United States, there is a very clear position about whose interests you are defending. There is a war situation in this country, and the police have a very particular side in that war. It was inevitable that the war would escalate, Patton said, and as it did, there are going to be more cops who are killed. A month after Brinks, some family members pulled a stick-up job at a Navy Federal Credit Union in Arlington, Virginia, that netted a mere $1,900. But the alliance between the May 19th women and Shakur and his crew was over. 4 days after Brinks, the New Jersey State Police hit the safe house Marilyn had rented at 223 Prospect Street in East Orange. Nobody was home, but the cops discovered a semi-automatic rifle, a pistol, and other weapons, makeup, wigs, and fake mustaches, insurance documents for Marilyn's white Oldsmobile, and diagrams and paraphernalia for building bombs. The cops found something else, a photo of a woman named Betty Jean Abramson. It turned out she was in custody in New York awaiting extradition back to California to face murder charges. Her alleged victim, Roseanne Gustine, shot in the head on June 2, 1980 in remote Honeydew, California, while trying to escape the Tribal Thumb compound. Another Tribal Thumb communard, Wendy Sue Heaton, was arrested later in New Orleans in connection with the Gustine killing. Witnesses said she'd been around town with Marilyn. There was another strange link with Marilyn. During their search of the Bronx safe house, investigators came across a radio base station. In those days, you had to register such equipment with the Federal Communications Commission. The cops placed a call to Washington and learned that the gear belonged to Tribal Thumb. Marilyn may have met Abramson and Heaton back in the Bay Area. They ran in overlapping far-left circles and kept in touch. Or perhaps they linked up later through the BLA or other underground networks. Marilyn had a steel trap mind, so she probably remembered that she had kept the photo at 223 Prospect. If so, she had to be worried that it would help the cops get closer to her and her comrades. The media couldn't get enough of the Brinks story. It had it all: M16-wielding gunmen, dead policemen, sacks of stolen cash, angry revolutionaries, and glassy-eyed relics from the Weather Underground. The New York Post particularly feasted. The paper most likely learned about May 19th from sources inside the nabbed investigation, and early in 1982 the paper published a richly lurid multi-part series on the group. The articles, written by a Guy Houghton, a seasoned veteran of London's Fleet Street, described in titillating detail life inside the May 19th collectives. In one article, Houghton called the group a hard-nosed matriarchy dominated by lesbians, with round-the-clock criticism, self-criticism sessions designed to expose ideological deviance. The collectives were sexual slaughterhouses for men who were required to be celibate, he said, and straight women, too, were subject to sexual repression. Women who look as though they may be getting together with a man are told, "Stay away from him or you'll be hurting your politics. He's politically bad for you." May 19th members read the stories and complained about them in their own publications. It was a pack of racist, sexist, and imperialist lies designed to discredit freedom fighters, they said. But some elements of the stories must have worried May 19th. The Post got some things right. They knew that Moncada was linked to May 19th, that May 19th was tight-knit and next to impossible to infiltrate, and that they'd been involved in armed robberies. And if the Post knew that, so did the police. Months after the incident, there was still plenty of post-Brinks heat. Every cop in the country had heard about what happened in Rockland County. Police rousted anybody with a Weather or BLA connection and hauled them in for questioning. Federal prosecutors decided to deploy a fearsome weapon, one usually reserved for mobsters, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. In New York, the FBI was working wiretaps, snapping surveillance photos and planting bugs. By then, the Bureau had Bana and one of Shakur's apartments, 85 Barrow Street, apartment 2L in Greenwich Village, wired. On March 8, 1982, Doc and a criminal crony were in the Barrow Street safe house. They had a long, rambling conversation about everything under the sun: women, dope, robberies, killing. They spilled on the various doings of Cakes, Flame, and Maroon, and about crackers, sniff, and smoke. Not long afterward, the FBI and NYPD raided Bana and a couple of safe houses, looking for Doc, but he managed to slip away. Pre-Brinks, the Bureau knew next to nothing about May 19th, but as the nabbed investigation continued, the name kept coming up again and again. Who were those people? Agents working the case picked up all kinds of interesting tips about the group. There were 30 to 40 hardcore members in and around New York City. Many of them had been in the Weather Underground, and the majority of May 19th members were women who followed a lesbian lifestyle, as one report put it. FBI special agents discovered a network of groups they believed were affiliated with May 19th, including the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee. Agents in the Bureau's Chicago office speculated that May 19th had created the committee in order to attract people who might otherwise be turned off by a group having the word communist in its name. In addition to public activities such as leafleting, meetings, and demonstrations, May 19th had a clandestine presence. FBI sources revealed that certain May 19th members operate in both underground and surface support capacity. The Brinks investigation revealed that radical remnants of the Weather Underground and the BLA were working together and had done a string of pre-Brinks armored truck jobs in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, as well as the breakouts of Morales and Chesimard. Marilyn, Judy, and Doc Shakur were all part of some sort of conspiracy, which was somehow linked to Bana and the Madam Bin collective. It was starting to connect up in the minds of investigators: cop-killing African-American revolutionaries, angry lesbians, maybe even pro-Castro Puerto Ricans. It looked like a witch's brew of violent extremism. The Bureau had been to see Allen, and he'd been hauled in front of a federal grand jury in the Southern District of New York investigating the Brinks crimes. He refused to talk, A federal judge said he was in contempt, and on May 26, 1982, he was sentenced to 7 months at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan. Not long after he got out, the feds indicted him as an accessory, after the fact, for having treated Marilyn's gunshot wound, purportedly the first such indictment of a physician since 1865, when Dr. Samuel Mudd was charged with setting the fractured leg of John Wilkes Booth, the fugitive assassin of President Abraham Lincoln. Allen scraped together $25,000 and made bail. Then, almost immediately, he was subpoenaed to give hair samples. He calculated his odds and reckoned he was facing 10 years minimum. After visiting Barbara and little Sarah in Chicago, he decided to go underground. He forfeited the $25,000 bail, and as of February 3, 1983, he was a federal fugitive. Meanwhile, the May 19th women were lying low, hoping to avoid the dragnet. If they kept cool and didn't make any stupid mistakes, maybe they could ride it out. The cops couldn't keep this up forever, could they? Then Sylvia was grabbed. Cops had found her prints inside one of the Brinks getaway cars. On November 9, 1982, FBI special agents picked her up outside her West 95th Street apartment. Tyrone Rison played a big part in the arrest. He'd been cooperating with the FBI in the hopes of getting a slot in the Federal Witness Protection Program. Later, in court, he spilled his guts about the botched operation, including the pre-robbery training session he'd done with Louise, Marilyn, and other May 19th members. It was payback time. He couldn't stand the woman, he told investigators. Sylvia didn't care for him either. She regarded him as a trigger-happy psycho. Rison's wish would come true. He pled guilty to felony murder, bank robbery, and racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations RICO conspiracy, and in exchange for his testimony, he disappeared into the Witness Protection Program. Investigators tore through Sylvia's place, spending hours inside. They left with 7 cartons of papers, including May 19th documents. Also in the haul, evidence linking Brinks participants to the FALN, a carbon copy of an original FALN communique, folders marked FALN and Morales escape, and a pre-explosion snap of Willie Morales. The papers were loaded with latent prints, including those of Linda Evans and Betty Ann Duke. The FBI thought Sylvia knew about Francis Tavern and other FALN bombings around the country. It also suspected she'd been a part of the Chesimard breakout. In custody, Sylvia was unflappable, but although detectives grilled her at length, they came up with nothing. Federal prosecutors unleashed a grand jury and summoned her to testify about the FALN. Sylvia told them to go to hell and got 3 years for criminal contempt. The FBI tried to interview Linda in Austin, but they couldn't find her. A confidential source told them that when she'd heard the Bureau was looking for her, she had left town, presumably gone underground. Repression has taken a toll on our movement. 2 May 19th women, Marcy and Mary, concluded in an undated paper that appraised the current state of revolutionary anti-imperialism. Their assessment: Reagan and his reactionary clique were on a right-wing rampage. The noose of capitalism and imperialism was tightening, and the fascist hirelings in Congress and the media were pumping out lies about the triumphs of the unfolding Reagan Revolution. After the Brinks fiasco and fallout, it would have made sense for May 19th to disband completely. There was no longer the family to support, and many of their once secret activities were now known to the police and the media. And some above-ground supporters of May 19th did drop away. But the inner core of the group went in the other direction and became more hardened and committed. Supporting the national liberation movements that shared their beliefs was paramount, according to May 19th's analysis. It had to sync up with what those freedom fighters were doing on the ground. We need to be able to respond to the offensives of Third World struggles by an offensive of our own, read one of its manifestos. They were under the leadership of the Third World Brothers and Sisters. May 19th members believed that they had special obligations. They'd had middle-class backgrounds. They were white, privileged, and living in the belly of the American beast. If their black and brown comrades were fighting and dying, so would they. But first, they'd have to build what they called a military capability. Michael Boney Bauman, a founder of the 2nd of June movement, a West German militant anarchist group active during the 1970s, articulated a similar approach. What's needed is a vanguard in the metropolis that declares its solidarity with the liberation movements of the Third World. Since it lives in the head of the monster, it can do the greatest damage there. The women weren't going to let anybody dismiss them as just a handful of leftovers from the 60s that are soon going to be out of sight, out of mind, as Betty Ann said. If not us, who? If not now, when? May 19th asked. In years past, the women had been relegated to the secondary teams during the family's robberies and jailbreaks. They were the backups, always there to do the secondary work for the male urban guerrillas. May 19th concluded that it needed to change course. Most of those guys were dead or in jail. While Marilyn and Alan were fugitives and Sylvia was locked up, the Corps had a lot more room for maneuvering than Doc Shakur. He was on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, and running from a motivated police force that wanted to bring him to justice for killing fellow cops. Using the alias Donnell Jackson, Doc hid out in Washington, D.C., where he caroused at after-hours hotspots such as Ladies' Inc. and Club Delight. He and a longtime companion, Sherry Laverne Dalton, the aforementioned Flame, relocated to the West Coast, where they lived for years as David and Claudia Bryant. The FBI eventually tracked them to Los Angeles, and on the morning of February 11, 1986, Special Agent David Mitchell, a member of the New York JTTF, arrested Shakur on an LA street. "I'm not going to talk," he told Mitchell, and he never did. On March 7th, Doc was back in New York, where he faced federal charges in connection with Brinks and other armed robberies, as well as violation of the RICO statute. The ever-defiant Doc told his supporters in the courtroom that he was a prisoner of war. "I wish to apologize for being caught," he said. Shakur was convicted on all counts in May 1988 and drew a 60-year sentence. Turned down for early release in 2016 and 2018, he's scheduled to appear again before the parole board in 2020. Sherry Dalton managed to elude capture and went the way of Chesimard and Morales. She lived in Cuba and established herself as the godmother of Cuban hip-hop, according to press accounts. She died in January 2019. The May 19th women decided on a new direction. Because Brinks was in the media, because the government was investigating, it was the aftermath of that, and that was a terrible, awful, heinous thing that happened, Susan said. If we were going to do anything for change, it couldn't be in any way, shape, or form that kind of activity. To put it in more straightforward terms, though armed expropriations weren't wrong, they brought too much attention. So May 19th had to look for another way. Something dramatic, something that made their political points, something that struck at the imperialist monster without inviting even more savage state repression. After Linda and Betty Ann, there was another post-Brinks addition to the May 19th lineup. She brought all the right credentials: SDS, Women's Movement, the Weather Underground, the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee, and the Madam Bin Graphics Collective. She'd even crossed paths with Linda back in Chicago, when they had been part of the school invasion in the suburbs. Laura Jane Whitehorn was born in Brooklyn on April 16, 1945, into a politically progressive family. Various aunts and uncles were ardent socialists. Her paternal grandfather was a Socialist Party member of the New York State Legislature. Laura's father, Nathaniel, was a lawyer, and her mother, Lenore, a social worker. The Whitehorns certainly weren't rich, but they were comfortably middle class. After World War II, the Whitehorns, like millions of other Americans, decamped from Brooklyn for a piece of the American dream in the New York suburbs. They bought a place in New Rochelle, an archetypal bedroom community. Laura was politically aware early on. Even out in tranquil Westchester County, the Whitehorns felt the sting of McCarthy-era anti-communism. A number of friends and relatives lost their jobs because of their political ties. And even as a child, Laura hated racism. "As a Jewish kid born in 1945, I was raised to hate prejudice," she said. She recounted an incident at a family gathering. A relative who had uttered a racist epithet was banished permanently from the Whitehorn household. On family excursions into the city, she saw relative deprivation. I would go into Harlem and see that people didn't have the same opportunities that people in white communities had, she recalled in 1999. It was just as plain as that. Family photos show a rambunctious, fun-loving adolescent with a megawatt smile. But Laura realized she was different from the other young people. When I was a kid, knowing that I was a lesbian and feeling that I was a lesbian made me feel I wasn't included in any recognized group, she told an interviewer in a 2000 documentary. Her sexual orientation shaped her politics, she said. Being a lesbian made me more open to feeling some kind of link to other people who were despised by the system. An academic star, Laura went on to Radcliffe. She hadn't come out and continued operating under society's heterosexual norms and worked to meet its expectations. In 1966, she married a Harvard Law School-educated lawyer, Donald J. Stang, who had been an undergrad at the university and a contemporary of Laura's back at New Rochelle High School. In Cambridge, she was swept up in the civil rights and anti-war movements, and her political rage was mounting. In the South, redneck cops were using cattle prods, dogs, and fire hoses on peaceful protesters. In the North, National Guard troops were patrolling riot-torn ghettos with fixed bayonets. In Vietnam, American jets were napalming hapless villagers. B-52 bombers were dropping massive explosive loads on both civilian and military targets, and UH-1 choppers were ferrying grunts into the swaying elephant grass. Grotesque phrases such as "free fire zone" and "search and destroy" entered the American vernacular. Before long, Laura's activism took on a harder edge. Like many others in the anti-war movement, she concluded that it was time to move from protest to resistance, as the slogan went. She became infatuated with the Black Panther Party, which was a step too far in the eyes of her parents. Although politically progressive, they freaked out when they discovered that their daughter was consorting with the shotgun-wielding Black Power advocates. She joined the Students for a Democratic Society and, as SDS fractured, the Weathermen. The FBI kept track of her, along with her weather comrades, and a 1975 U.S. Senate report on the group itemized her offenses: disorderly conduct, malicious mischief, and even malicious prowling. Laura was also part of Weather's Days of Rage demonstration in Chicago in October 1969. The theme, Bring the War Home. In the run-up to the event, a poster declared, "Hot town, pigs in the streets, but the streets belong to the people. Dig it?" During the three-day rampage, hundreds of jacked-up young insurrectionists, wielding pipes and chains, their heads protected with football helmets, trashed cars and shops along the city's moneyed Gold Coast. Sirens screamed day and night, cops cracked heads, and paddy wagons bulged with scruffy radicals. President Nixon called the weather hordes thugs and hoodlums who have always plagued the good people. Less predictably, the Black Panthers denounced the Days of Rage as opportunistic and child's play. By that point, Laura considered herself a committed communist and revolutionary. It was the high tide of national liberation around the world, she said in 1979. My lesbianism makes me a better anti-imperialist, she said. I left graduate school, left my husband, and joined a weather collective, and wound up eating noodles with garlic butter on them every night for a month, and then oatmeal with nothing on it for 3 months. First lesbianism, now Leninism, a terrifying sexual political combination as far as most of mid-century America was concerned. Just as Laura Whitehorn got serious about her involvement, Weather started waging an armed campaign. On March 6, 1970, a nail-studded bomb, intended for a non-commissioned officer's dance at Fort Dix, New Jersey, accidentally detonated at 18 West 11th Street in Greenwich Village. The townhouse pancaked and burned. Neighbors, including the actor Dustin Hoffman, looked on as the mess smoldered and rescue workers recovered the bodies of 3 weather people, Terry Robbins, Ted Gold, and Diana Oughton. Oughton's corpse didn't have a head. The incident didn't stop Weather from going on to carry out dozens of bombings, including dynamite attacks on the Pentagon, the State Department, and the U.S. Capitol. Other operations were more farcical. Insurgent mischief, former Weather Underground leader Bill Ayers called them. One notable example, In September 1970, hippie icon and LSD guru Timothy Leary was at the low-security California Men's Colony Prison, serving time for pot possession. Leary, a self-described psychonaut, promoted LSD and other psychedelic drugs as a gateway to spiritual enlightenment and as a pathway to God himself. On September 15th, during a routine bed check, prison guards discovered that Leary was gone. They found a note under his mattress in which the guru compared himself to Socrates, Jesus Christ, and the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Moreover, the former Harvard psychology lecturer insisted that psychedelics could cure an array of sexual disorders, including impotence and frigidity, both of which, like homosexuality, are symbolic screw-ups, he told Playboy magazine in 1966. Leary, whom Ronald Reagan, while California governor, had called a Robespierre on acid, a kingpin hell-bent on unraveling the normal order, had climbed over the prison's chain-link fence. Leary's fawning followers referred to him as Dr. Tim. Nixon fumed and fulminated about the Pied Piper of the counterculture, reportedly labeling him the most dangerous man in America. Weather people picked him up, hid him in safe houses, gave him a doctored passport, and helped him get out of the country. They got $20,000 for the job. Dr. Tim made it all the way to Algeria, where exiled Black Panther Party Minister of Information Eldridge Cleaver took him in. Newspaper photos showed a grinning, Lenin cap-wearing Leary strolling through Algiers at Cleaver's side. The Algerian regime, which was sympathetic to many Third World anti-colonial movements, had given Cleaver and his wife, Kathleen, the use of what the New York Times called a drab, unheated apartment in the tacky suburb of Pointe Pescade. Cleaver was warned not to attract too much attention to himself. Joining his entourage was another Panther, Sekou Odinga. In 1975, Cleaver's career took a new direction. He designed and marketed codpiece-fronted trousers. He told the Harvard Crimson that, in a conventional pair of pants, the penis gets tucked behind the pants, you know? But in these pants, the penis is held in a sheath of cloth that sticks outside of the pants. What's wrong with getting an erection and letting people know about it? Leary's acid-taking and merrymaking continued unabated, much to Cleaver's annoyance. Cleaver's concerns were well-founded. The Algerian regime was politically radical but socially conservative, and soon it hustled Leary out of the country. Like an acid-addled Scarlet Pimpernel, he bounced from country to country, eventually winding up in Kabul, Afghanistan, a stop along the so-called hippie trail. The FBI nabbed him at the airport.
Katherine, Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. So we will pause. We're in chapter 10, If Not Us, Who? And we're kind of midway in between after old Timothy Leary has been nabbed. So many of these people that are mentioned in the book, last week with the Symbionese Liberation Army, this week with Timothy Leary, so many of these people are mentioned in connection with the Central Intelligence Agency, and for a variety of different reasons, promotion of all of these drugs. Can I mention again, John Potash, Drugs as Weapons Against Us? He was a guest on the Cows in 2016, just the same year that that book was published. And he talks about all of that during this exact time period, many ways to distract non-white people who are trying to get focused and serious about replacing white supremacy with justice. One of them to get lots of non-white people consuming drugs, totally mess up your brain computer, and then all this wacky, wild sex, which we've heard about every single page of this book, all kinds of anti-sex and orgy sex and sex with white people and sex. And then we can't, do all the section and then we do a little more drugs. Lots of confusion. But as I said, confusion linked, deliberate confusion that is linked to the CIA, Symbionese Liberation Army, and then Timothy Leary. Anyway, Electric Kool-Aid, that was Jonestown, remember? Anyway, if you have commentary on the first portion of the read, the number to dial 720-716-7300, the code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. I do want to point out, for the record, I could have made a much lengthier introduction of bombing related segments just related to like the past 10 days. I could have went local because there was a white man who was just sentenced to 5 years detonating a pipe bomb deliberately on a black couple's vehicle. And they have video. They had, pretty much everybody has those door cams and all that stuff. So they have video, and you can see his car riding by, and he throws the IED out, and bang, car blows up, airbag goes off, and all of that. But this white man was just convicted this week, like 2-3 days ago, and sent messages of racism. And then I played the segments about all these different Turtle Island Liberation Front groups in Louisiana and California, and they got bomb plots for New Year's Eve. This is white culture on display, and it's just rampant, blowing up this and blowing up that. And the same thing I said before, sometimes it's white people who say, hey, we're against the establishment, down with the system, we got to go blow up something. Or we got to practice racism, white supremacy. Let's go up, blow up the nigger's church. Let's go blow up the nigger's car, blow up the nigger's house. Come on. The number again, 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Tim McVeigh, Eric Rudolph, see, Columbine, that's a failed bombing. And they even said we are competing with Tim McVeigh. We're going to kill way more than he did. Tim didn't do it right. And they had the pipe bombs. See, anarchist cookbook, see? White culture, we've been talking about this for a while. Let's see, I will get in one email, and then we'll see if folks have commentary. I'll get in some of my notes as well. Let's see. Email number 1. Greetings, Gus, listeners, callers. I remember that I ate at Francis Tavern, site of the 1975 bombing in the early 1980s. I don't think I was aware of the bombing history at that time. I think the white revolutionaries in this text are racist white supremacists. My reasons: 1. Most, if not all, were raised in racially restrictive regions. 2. Mission trips in which suspected racists travel to regions far from their home for the purpose of helping non-white people, Native American reservations, as opposed to helping the non-white people who are near where they live. Whenever suspected racists tell me about their mission trips, I get very suspicious. 3. With all their education and resources, it seems they could have easily provided constructive assistance to non-white victims, as opposed to these bombings, which seem to provide no constructive benefit to non-white victims. That would be a big one. Like, I do not see how any of these acts, bombings, and what Bill Ayers called it, insurgent mischief, they had that in quotes, I don't see how any of this helps solve any problems for people classified as black, non-white people, Puerto Ricans. I don't see how it would have improved quality of life for any non-white people. If anything, it would have made things way worse, because they would have probably accused you one of these insurgents who did this. You had something to do with it. You one of the above ground, folks who maybe was doing intelligence or scouting out or made a ham sandwich for one of these folks. That's what I could see happening. I don't know why any of these acts would make things better or easier for any black people, any non-white people, period. Maybe I'm not understanding. 4, and they even got doctors in this group. Like, hey man, you all could have got medical programs. You'd already seen that with the Black Panther Party. That would have been way more beneficial and probably would have upset racists equally. You going out and bombing structures, empty structures or what have you, as opposed to, hey, we're gonna go out and see that these black people are healthy, got good strong bones, teeth, checkups and all of that. Oh no, we wanted them to die and be in poor health and have dialysis, need dialysis rather, be on diabetes and such. That's what we wanted. We don't want you, giving them no. They could have done that, right? You can go and help out and give medical attention to these old terrorists and such. Come on. Let's see. 4. They were involved in at least one incident in which a non-white victim was killed. Officer Waverly. Absolutely. 5, evidence of sexual contact with non-white victims. Cowbell, lots of that. The anti-sexual behaviors of the white terrorists may also be a part of this. I think it's major because that seemed to be a major area of focus during that time period. There have been so many people classified as white who have said that at that very moment, mid-late 1960s, just as you're having, as I said, black people being very focused and serious about replacing white supremacy with justice. What can we do? Puff, puff, pass. And not no male and a female. That's boring. How about male and a male? Or female and a female? Or a whole room. We get the dog, it'll be great. All that old anti-sex and promote that real aggressive. And with the drugs, we do it all together. Distraction, totally mess up your brain computer. Let's see, chapter 9. Special agents kept tabs on the so-called lavender lads who were supposedly cavorting in the nation's homosexual netherworld. The State Department was overrun with sexual perverts, like Jeffrey Epstein. The same year, as many as 3,000 homosexuals were employed by the state. The lavender scare was on, and thousands of Americans would lose their livelihood and endure public and private humiliation. See J. Edgar Hoover, gay, or just a man who has sex with men. ABC News, November 14, 2011. This was mentioned in the notes at the end of the chapter. I remember we had on Miss Millie McGee. I can mention her 2 times this week, but she is a black female, and she wrote a whole book and did a documentary film with her evidence and theory that J. Edgar Hoover had at least one non-white parent, and may have been what they call passing, and that may have been motivation for his virulent racism, to make sure that he was accepted as a white person and no one ever questioned. And even you heard some of it in the description of Hoover. I'll get to that later, but some of it came out there. But it did remind me of Miss Millie McGee, guest on the Cows way back in 2009, but she's not the only one. Many reports talk about this, and this theory, I think, is another one of those that was kind of open secret, as they say, that many people had talked about this. Anyway, 2, Hoover worried about the country's growing civil rights movement. There does not appear to be a mention of the term COINTELPRO specifically in this chapter. It is not in the notes at the end of the chapter. That would be a significant, either, I'd have to say deliberate omission, because if you have all this detailed information, you certainly know about COINTELPRO, and I think he does mention it in the other parts of the book, and as it relates to communists and all this old nonsense. But man, Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, the focus switched to black. It had been on black people the whole time, even back when it was the Bureau of Investigation. This is back in Marcus Garvey days, but certainly by 1950s, 1960s, the focus is switching to Dr. King, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, black people. At that time, H. Rap Brown, now Jamil Al-Amin. But certainly all of the efforts to neutralize black people, and even identifying the Black Panther Party as the greatest threat to internal security of the country, like that is massive. Let's see. 3, the the Bureau's hunt for the weather people would be largely futile. Nobody went to jail for any of the Weather Underground's bombings. How much did the fact that they were classified as white play a role in the futility and lack of jail time for the bombings? I suspect it had a major role. Absolutely. I could not imagine myself, Dick Gregory, Huey P. Newton, Assata Shakur, Angela Davis, if we were going around and blowing up empty dog kennels. There is no way it would be a, well, let's let bygones be, don't do it no more. No way. Or even, you know, hey, we did do all the COINTELPRO and we've been spying on y'all and tapping your phone and, you know, had illegal tags on you and what have you and put recording devices in your car. So we didn't have no warrant to do all that. So I guess, you know, we'll just call it even and, you know, don't do it no more. Ain't no way in the world. And then, much less, same thing I've been saying the whole time, let Bill Ayers call this insurgent mischief and then go get a cushy job at a state university with benefits. You're loony. Let's see. 4. Deputy Director Mark Felt would be prosecuted for illegal surveillance. Felt was the infamous deep throat of the Watergate investigation. Interesting, this was not mentioned. The man who was deep throat chasing Mark Felt in Time, John Stacks, 2008. I thought he did mention that Felt was the source in the Watergate leak. I guess he's saying that he was, the prosecution portion was left out. I guess that, I don't know why he didn't include that. Chapter 10. The New York Post, May 19th. Sexual slaughterhouse for men who were required to be celibate, he said, and straight women too were subject to sexual repression. Was this COINTELPRO-like planted article? It may have been. Not sure. It may have been. 2. November 9, 1982, FBI special agents picked her up. I think this is Sylvia Baldini, outside her West 95th Street apartment. Tyrone Reeson played a big part in the arrest. His wife, who was also convicted, was released, and they both eventually went into witness protection. See suspects in Brink armored case aiding U.S. New York Times, 1982. There are lots of New York Times reports about this case, and then Mr. Reeson specifically, if you want to read a little bit more and get details and such. 3. FBI eventually tracked them to Los Angeles, and on the morning of, this is Matula Shakur, Dr. Matula Shakur, February 11, 1986, they arrested Shakur on an LA street. I'm not going to talk. He told Mitchell, and he never did. Shakur was convicted on all counts in May 1988 and drew a 60-year sentence, turned down for early release in 2016. In 2018, he's scheduled to appear again before parole board in 2020. Assata Shakur never talked either. Stick to your code. 4. Laura Jane Whitehorn was born in Brooklyn on April 16, 1945. Her family was ardent socialists. After World War II, the Whitehorns, like millions of other Americans, decamped from Brooklyn for a piece of the American dream in the New York suburbs. They bought a place in New Rochelle. White flight, perhaps? Absolutely. And that's what we talked about earlier this week. They started building the highways, those so-called suburbs. That was all government financed, the so-called suburbs, so that white people could get away from the niggers in the inner cities. They got their nice new cars. They got their nice big houses. No white people allowed. These are kind of racially restricted areas too. And go out and just have a grand old time with no niggers. New Rochelle, 2020 population, 79,726, 44% white, 18.9% black, 32.9% Hispanic. So they have lots of non-white people at this juncture. 5. Laura hated racism. That right there is about as suspicious as a white person saying, I took a summer and went to Mozambique to do missionary work with the children. Like, oh man, they are one and the same. I hate racism. Got to run. As a Jewish kid born in 1945, I was raised to hate prejudice, she said. She recounted an incident at a family gathering. A relative who had uttered a racist epithet, I bet that was a racist joke, was banished permanently from the White Horn household. Did they have any non-white people in their lives as friends or as close acquaintances who were not maids? Great question. 6. Laura, lesbian, her sexual orientation shaped her politics. She said, being a lesbian made me more open to feeling some kind of link to other people who were despised by the system. Anti-sexual behavior makes you less racist? What? Like, what? I've heard that nonsense before, but I mean, I'm not aware of them going out, we lynching all the queers we can find. Or, same one I go to all the time, where do they have sundown towns where, hey, queers, you better be out of here. When the sun goes down, you beat it, beat it, beat it. Where's that at? Trans folks, man, sun going down, you better be on out of here, buddy. Where does that, exist at? Anywhere in the world, much less, hundreds of them, as was the case with black people. Come on, stop all the nonsense. Let's see. 7. Whitehorn's parents freaked out when they discovered that their daughter was consorting with the shotgun-wielding black power advocates. Would they have been less freaked out if they were blonde-haired and blue-eyed? Probably. Probably. 8. Laura was also part of the Weather Days of Rage demonstration in Chicago in October 1969. The theme, Bring the War Home, the three-day rampage. See text, Days of Rage, America's Radical, that word, underground, the FBI and the Forgotten Age of Revolutionary Violence by Brian Burrow. I haven't read that one myself either. 9. Weather started waging an armed campaign on March 6, 1970. A nail-studded bomb accidentally detonated at 18 West 11th Street in Greenwich Village. Weather people Terry Robbins, Ted Gold, and Diana Otten's corpse didn't have a head. Other operations were more farcical. Insurgent mischief, as I said. In fact, I remind people when I ask folks, the Weather Underground, were these people terrorists? No, they ain't. They just, they were about helping the black people, and they not racist. They were against the system. I say, man, didn't they blow up some of their own members? And I mean, they were in a apartment setting where other people easily could have been killed, injured, whatever the case may be. I mean, man, at minimum, the danger of all of this, you're supposed to be sophisticated and surgical and precise with things, scientific. And this is the second time that we've heard some of these folks, William Morales and them, supposed to be bombing in the name of liberation and we're against racism and John Brown and all that, and you blowing yourself up. Let's see. 10. September 1970, hippie icon and LSD guru Timothy Leary was at a low-security California men's colony prison. Psychonaut promoted LSD and other psychedelic drugs as a gateway to spiritual enlightenment and as a pathway to God himself. Leary was also a fired Harvard psychology professor for performing questionable human experiments using LSD. A ubiquitous figure in the media during the 1960s and 70s, his most famous quote was, "Tune in, turn on, drop out." He was arrested 36 times for drug possession. Now, again, I said during Jonestown, was Jonestown a CIA medical experiment where he had been drugging his members all throughout all of this? They pointed out there were many newspaper reports in the New York Times, LA Times, all of the major news publications in this part of the world about CIA and LSD experiments being conducted against people's unwitting, where they didn't even know that this was happening, particularly in areas like San Francisco, Bay Area, right where Jonestown was operating, right where the Symbionese Liberation Army was, right where Timothy Leary is hanging out, more Southern California too. But I mean, all of this is going on in the same area, and at some of the major institutions like Cal, Berkeley, Stanford that are right in the same area. Let's see, and some of the experiments that were happening in prisons, which would go back Symbionese Liberation Army, Donald Freeze. Let's see. And that's as far as we got. We'll stop there. Okay. Email again, untiljustice@gmail.com. And then the number 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. I'll share a few of my notes and then see if others have thoughts, observations on the text as we proceed. Again, even more relevant in my view than when we started. And when we started, they just caught they caught the suspect who left the bombs, IEDs, outside the Republican and Democratic National Conventions or headquarters in Washington, D.C. just before January 6th. More bombs, even though that person classified as black. We'll have to get more details about all that. Let's see. My notes have to go back to the beginning. Scrolling back to 9. Let's see. Okay. For the beginning of this week. And this, I had mentioned this last time, you can be classified as black. You don't have to be a Panther. You don't have to be in the NAACP. You don't have to be in, not effing around. None of that. Being just classified as black can be enough, much less, we saw you carrying Minister Malcolm X's book. We saw you listening to Dr. Cambon videos on YouTube. We saw you with Assata Shakur's book, anything of that nature. It'd be enough. You are some sort of radical terrorist. We got to keep tabs on you. You're a potential subversive. We got to fire you and all the rest of it. That is more than, and they said this, you could be a part of a nonviolent group, and that's just the front for the subversion. See, you go out and do fundraising or do reconnaissance for these other old radical Negroes. See, it's all just part of one poisonous web, Let's see. He says, Denton, one of these white experts, says subversives weren't necessarily criminals. Nevertheless, they had to be fought. They were the enemy within, working covertly to destroy the system. What system are you talking about exactly? Let's see. They said they decided that they were going to increase attention on so-called leftist institutions. Mother Jones magazine, which still exists, the National Lawyers Guild. Now that stuck out to me because we just had that broadcast on the radical white lawyers representing radical black people or militant black people, and the National Lawyers Guild was a big part of that report. Now, even though a large part, we talked about the racism within the organization that is like 95% white, and was mostly male or all male at first, but then they, slowly started to allow mostly white women. We just talked about the racism within that organization and why you had to have all these other offshoot black law organizations for black attorneys. So that just stuck out to me to have them mention as one of the groups where they said they were going to increase. But in fact, it was mentioned when we had our guest on this week that the FBI, they increased adverse attention, detrimental attention on the National Lawyers Guild at the time when they put a black person in charge of the group. What's more subversive than that? They said the terrorism hardliners insisted that the FBI needed to be unleashed. Now, I find this fascinating because at the exact same time period, he just told us last week about the Klan attack in North Carolina. So you have clear evidence. They killed 5 people. It's not like, they're just talking and being rowdy, burning crosses. They killed 5 people. 4 of them white. You have clear, and at the same time, Joseph Paul Franklin white dude is going and killing folks, killing black people. He went and attempted an assassination on Vernon Jordan. He was shooting black people that were just in sexual arrangements with white people. Just a regular race soldier terrorist, serial killer. Joey 22 started in 1980 and went to 1981, where he's just going and killing black dudes in Buffalo and New York City. The Atlanta child murders that started in 1979 went all the way through 1980, or excuse me, went all the way to 1983. So I mean, you got lots of activity to point at and be like, man, if we do have terrorism, it would seem to be lots of it. Man, we got a lot of racial terrorism that would need to be the focus. And they don't focus on that at all. And we talked to people who said, hey man, you can draw a straight line from what really Greensboro, North Carolina, Joseph Paul Franklin. I said at the time that those slaughterings were happening in Buffalo, Joey 22, they had a congressional inquiry to ask if there was a racial conspiracy against black people because of all the violent attacks that were happening at that time against black people. And then you just keep right on walking with all those incidents, and you would get right up Timothy McVeigh and what had Waco, since we mentioned that. With 1990, Eric Rudolph would be in there. And you just keep right on rolling. You would get up to January 6th and what have you before then. But Dylan Storm Roof, we could put that in too. I'm kind of going roughshod over it, but I mean, you could make a clear line and just trace all of this, and they would say, hey man, this is not no man. How did we end up at January 6th? And even what I've been saying, the white people going out and they get New Year's Eve. We got the bombs to go off in California. All of that white domestic terrorism that gets ignored. Really, white people, period. And making bombs and all this. That's how you can have Eric Rudolph and all the rest of it. All that gets ignored, and you just are focusing on black people. Oh, we got the immigrants and folks that came over and they hop in the border and all the rest of it, and Leroy and the black people and Sue Africa and all the rest of the white terrorists. Totally ignored. And it just gets to fester and it end up having another January 6th. Let's see. So, this is what I meant about Hoover. So that when they get to J. Edgar Hoover, they say his New York Times obituary described him in his declining years. The once ruddy face was puffy and pale. I pointed that out for years in the Katherine Massey book club. It is almost unanimous when writers use the term pale. They are talking about someone who is about to die, who is in horrible health. You are never described as pale, lacking color. It is never a good thing. It is never like a positive adjective, like they're paying you a compliment. It isn't, oh man, they got one foot on the bar of soap. Let's see. Oh, and then I didn't even get all of it, so I'm just picking up next sentence. The brushed back gray-brown hair was straight and thin, not the wiry, dark curls of a few years ago. That right there got them dark curls. Kinky. Let's see. Just the name stood out. I think it's a pretty common pattern, but frequently black people, entertainers in a variety of fields will select the names of white gangsters to name ourselves after. And you see it again here, Pretty Boy Floyd, and they're talking about all these Depression era gangsters, and of course the Negro Boxer, that was his nickname early in his career. When they're talking about the history of the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover and saying that they had the latest crime-fighting technologies, so much of what they do and still revolves around is getting people to snitch. and confess and tell them themselves and that sort of thing. It's not, they give the impression, CSI and all of that, but I'm reminded they were talking about the FBI specifically and saying that they had all that fabricated evidence where they would go and get their lab people to say, oh, we got scientific certainty about these hair fibers, and it turned out all that was a lie. So they'd like you to think, yeah, we got all these scientific technology. Get out of here. Let's see. And it said that they were at this time focusing on the crimes like white slavers. You mean like Jack Johnson? That's what they locked him up for. Let's see. Even it says where they have all this top secret effort about the Manhattan Project. That's just white bombing. We had the big film, I think a year or two ago, about all the white scientists and effort to get the bombs for World War II. And I was saying that is white culture, because I think we were reading Columbine at that time. Just that is white culture. Bombing and blowing up and even being cowardly about it, where you bomb people and they don't even know what's happening. They go out to check the mail and pow, blew their head off. They don't even know what's going on. Let's see. He gives us the data that the ranks of special agents at the Bureau was all male until 1972. I thought it was really cowardly and racist that he didn't say it was all white male. How many niggers did they have at the Bureau in 1970? They weren't cleaning toilets. When did they hire the first black people? He doesn't include any of that information. They've just been a bastion of racial egalitarianism from their inception. Really? Marcus Garvey would beg to differ. Let's see. Oh, I thought this was massively important, like maybe one of the worst omissions of the text, particularly in comparison as we move forward. He says, by the mid-1960s, even some of the director's senior lieutenants were worried about the questionable legality of some of the clandestine FBI operations. We do not obtain authorization for black bag jobs from outside the Bureau. Top Hoover aide William C. Sullivan wrote in July 1966 memo to the director. Such a technique involves trespass and is clearly illegal. Therefore, it would be impossible to obtain any legal sanction for it, but the break-ins and bugging continue. There is no footnote, no nothing. William Sullivan was shot and killed in a highly suspicious hunting accident in the middle of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, where they were investigating this exact thing. Government overreach. What is up with their involvement in these assassinations? Did they have something to do? This talking about the U.S. government. Did they have something to do with the assassination of Dr. King? Did they have something to do with the assassination of Malcolm X? Did they have, going all down the line, did they have something to do with the assassination of JFK? Going through all of this, William Sullivan was supposed to testify. He was shot in a so-called hunting accident. This guy was in charge. Very high. They said one of the top aides. He was in charge of some of these programs at the time that Dr. King was assassinated. They wanted him to come in and testify. What were you all doing? 1968, the time that King was assassinated, and he gets killed in a so-called hunting accident. To have that not even, like, you don't have to even give no, I think this was, they wanted to shut him up, blah, 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 but I mean just, hey, give the data on what happened to him. It was in a short time afterward, and it's very relevant to the story that's being told. Let's see. Also in the New York Times, just like Tyrone Ricin mentioned previously. Let's see. When he says the weather people, whites, Those who faced outstanding earlier charges, such as those stemming from the Days of Rage, were often able to get them dismissed. Nobody went to jail for any of the Weather Underground's bombings. That, I mean, just, are you serious? If that had been Fred Hampton, me, Eldridge Cleaver, like I said, we bombed, you know, the local animal shelter when it was empty and they didn't have a single hound in the facility. They ain't gonna let that slide? Come on. Let's see. When they gave the testimony from Felt, and he said that there were hundreds of bombs were exploding all over the country, and he says Felt was right about the scale of the violent extremism. In 1971, there were more than 400 terrorist attacks. That does not say there were 400 bombings. I don't know what they're describing as a terrorist attack. Is that somebody came and yelled with a stick? Is that somebody threw rocks at us? Like, what are you counting as a terrorist attack? That's kind of broad. I mean, hey, I know from right now, what gets called terrorism is very, there's a lot of discretion with regards to what and whom is labeled terrorism or a terrorist. So you would have to, and particularly he was slick with the switch. He said that there were hundreds of bombings. Were there hundreds of bombings? Were there more than 400 bombings in 1971? Because that seems outrageous. He says there were 400 terrorist attacks. Some of them could have been race soldiers, you know, doing whatever too. Let's see. He said the alleged illegal domestic snooping had tarnished the FBI's image. That word tarnished is in the word God. I'm not sure. Like, white people generally do not get upset with other white people for practicing racism. They would have to give me evidence that, and I mean, explain what do you mean exactly when you say their image was tarnished. And then you would have to show me evidence that this is true, that some other white people had a problem. Some other white people, they were not pleased with what the FBI had been doing with these illegal activities. Some other powerful white people at that. Let's see. They keep saying that M19, that this is a sophisticated and clandestine network. They keep saying that these folks are bumbling and stupid and blew themselves up. They wrote everything down. We've heard that over and over. They wrote everything down so we could go and just pick up all the little written breadcrumbs and get all the little extra information, and then they're leaving fingerprints here and there. So, I mean, you know, they're not that sophisticated. Let's see. And the same thing that I said before, they'll tell us on the one hand that they, FBI, that they got all this new scientific crime fighting technology, and then they come back on the other hand and say, well, one crime, one investigation, and they'd part ways. And when they were forced to work together, there was serious tension between the FBI and its state and local counterparts. Cops often regarded the Bureau as self-aggrandizing, and some FBI officials saw state and local police as unprofessional, failing to meet their own high standards. I had to stop right there for so many reasons. Like, wait a minute, you all are supposed to be lawmen. You all are supposed to be about practicing justice. What is all this? And it even reminded white people do not get along. They just practice racism. White people don't even like other white people. And same time, it also made me think, like, what do you mean? The FBI has all of these really lofty standards that these local officers failed to meet. You just said that you all are conducting all these illegal wiretaps and illegal surveillance where you don't have no warrant for all of this, and committing crimes and being accused of killing people like Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. What do you mean, lofty stand? We ain't even got to, is J. Edgar Hoover around here dressing up like a little girl and engaging in all this so-called kinky sex? We ain't got to all that. We ain't even got to the current you all lying and making up all this scientific data about the hair and what have. We ain't even got to all that. We can just stick with you all doing all this illegal surveillance and what have you. What do you mean they don't meet our lofty standards? Get out of here, man. That ain't the snowflake calling the milk white. Let's see. Interesting endnotes that he includes about J. Edgar Hoover's sexual proclivities. Moving to chapter 10, where they justify, they say Mary Patton and Donna Baruch talked on WBAI public radio in New York. They still exist. And Dr. Cambon was a big fan of WBAI. He used to listen all the time. And they say that, you choose to be a cop at this time in the history of the U.S., and there's a very clear position about whose interest you're defending. There is a war situation in this country, and the police have a very particular side in the war. Like, what? What? That, I do not agree with that at all. I do not think that that is logical. I have heard non-white officers vocalize that is not why they joined to be an enforcement officer. They joined because there was a system of racism, and they only saw white enforcement officers, and they said, hey, maybe it would be better to have some non-white officers who have the correct intentions to go out and help other non-white people in the area, non-white citizens in the area, civilians. I've heard them say that directly. That is way different than, well, it's system of racism, so if I go get a badge, I'm part of the system of racism. So, hey, somebody wants to fight back against racism, come get me. What? No. If it's a system of racism and it's going to be some counter violence, it should make sure you are getting people who are racist. They would have to be classified as white. Should not be no non-white people subject to no counter violence because you're upset about racism. We talk about this extensively with Christopher Dorner, remember, 2013. Let's see. They talked about pulling a heist after the Brinks bank robbery at the Navy Federal Credit Union, where they got a little less than $2,000. I personally think that that is very low for the risk involved. I mean, $2,000, even if you adjust for inflation. I mean, Jesus Christ, like, you got, how many people do you have to split this $2,000 between? How long is this supposed to last? How many of these bank robberies do we have to carry out over a period of time to get the necessary funds that we need? Like, man, that just, not too many bank robbers get to retire. I see why. Let's see. I thought it was interesting, this conversation allegedly that they capture from March 8th, 1982, between Doc and some criminal crony, he says, where he goes into, he has direct quotes where he says they're talking about robberies and killing and cakes and flames and crackers and smoke, where, like, it's just like Negro dialect, like little, I just give you little bits of Negro jargon and little bits of Negro slang where I don't have to really go into detail to give any full sentences. I can just give a word. And so I looked at the footnote to see, well, where did you, is there like a recording of this conversation, which it very well could be, or a transcript or something? Where did you, get these cracker? Where did they say all of this? And so I go to the end note, and the trial transcript apparently talks about the whatever portions of this conversation that they had in March of 1982 in the trial. So apparently he read the trial transcript. I kind of had a question there, because I mean, man, with all the questionable activity of the agents involved in these cases, where did they get this from? So was this one of their illegal wiretaps that they had, where they got the contents of this conversation and then went and cherry-picked portions, where they want to get in that they just said cracker, we're talking about drugs or whatever. It gave me pause. It gave me pause, because I was wondering, where did you hear all of this to give these exact quotes from? Let's see. So again, they say the white lesbians here, they were under the leadership of the Third World Brothers and Sisters. The May 19th members believed that they had special obligations. They had middle-class backgrounds. They were white, privileged, doesn't say powerful, and living in the belly of the beast. People use that metaphor all the time. I have no idea what that means. The belly of the beast? Huh? If their black and brown comrades were fighting and dying, so would they. How about just solve some of the problems so fewer black people have to die? How about that? Fewer black people have to go to greater confinement. How about that? Wouldn't that make more sense? Let's see. Armed expropriations, the lame term that they use for bank robberies. White people are so great at those euphemisms. I know if it had been exclusively black people doing these bank robberies, it wouldn't be no armed expropriations. Lower White House. Let's see. White Horse, excuse me. White Horns. White Horns. Let's see. She said, when I was a child, knowing I was a lesbian and feeling that I was a lesbian made me feel I wasn't included in any recognized group. I have no idea what that means. If you are white, you are in the most powerful group in the known universe. Lesbian, handicapped, disabled, elderly, trans, you are white. You are in. Let's see. Says that White Horns became infatuated with the Black Panther Party. I thought that was such an interesting word choice. Doesn't, dedicated or committed, inspired, infatuated. That implies like some sort of emotional connection, maybe even some sort of what they call like romantic type of thing, which is because she says she's a lesbian. So why would you be, that's. Anyway, so she's infatuated, which was a step too far in the eyes of her parents. They freaked out. I thought that was an interesting word, too. Free. It was super free. We got the Rick James back. Let's see. All of this, the running around in the streets for the days of rage, and then they got to go bomb buildings, and the resident Timothy Leary and doing like it's just and the anti-sex, because that's such a big part of it. She's a proud lesbian, and all of this is so much confusion. Jesus Christ, like we totally forgot. Do we have a definition for racism? We got people saying that they're John Brown and all of this. Like, what are we trying to do here? Oh, replace white supremacy with just like everything get lost. By the time you done started doing drugs and puff here, and we gonna have an orgy here, and let's go rob the bank here, and we got the bombs here, and oh, don't blow your fingers off, and all that. You didn't. What? Wait a minute. What are we trying to do here again now? Wait a minute. The insurgent mischief. You didn't have a good month of insurgent mischief. You didn't forgot anything about doing something constructive. Let's see. Oh, and then it says on just as Laura Whitehorn got serious about her involvement, Weather started waging an armed campaign on March 6, 1970. A nail-studded bomb intended for a non-commissioned officer's dance at Fort Knox, New Jersey, accidentally detonated. Now we got, that portion of it, but the first part, a non-commissioned officer's dance. Are these terrorists? That's not no empty building, and even if it was empty, like Jesus Christ, what is the constructive value of that? A nail-studded bomb? That is so like, that's the Tsarnaev brothers, the Boston Marathon bombing. Now, I don't think they were classified, accepted as white. But still, now, that's one of them April bombings. I said it's a long list of them April bombings that goes on into perpetuity. But I mean, same thing. Send no IED and put them old screws and all that. What is all that for? Maim some people. Non-commit. What is that for? The same thing. Can you guarantee that the non-commissioned officers dance, ain't gonna be no non-white people present. It's only gonna be people that you think are racist, and hey, this is counter-violence. You get what's coming to you. I don't think so. These folks are so reckless and whatever, like, whatever. Kill whoever's there. Tough nookies. You shouldn't have, try to be an officer. Let's see. Timothy Leary, same thing with all the drugs. He pops up in the Jonestown book, same period of time. I have no idea why Eldridge Cleaver would have welcomed him to begin with. If I'm on the run from white people and they want to put me in greater confinement, why am I consorting with some other racist drug-using fugitive? Like, I got enough problems already. Is this not all white people that's racist? I got enough problems. You are a powerful white dude, and you got your little drug habit too, so you'll be good. You'll figure it out on your own. You do not need me. Mess my thing up over here in Algiers. They beat to put both of us out. Let's see. And this was I was saying. Okay, so William Sullivan, there's no end note. There is no additional information regarding William Sullivan's highly suspicious death, nor his role at the FBI at the time of many important assassinations where the FBI was suspected of involvement. Martin Luther King, most importantly. But we can include an end note that for Eldridge Cleaver, 1975, Cleaver's career took a new direction. He designed and marketed cod piece fronted trousers. He told the Herald Harvard Crimson that in a conventional pair of pants, the penis gets tucked behind the pants, but in these pants, the penis is held in a sheath of cloth that sticks outside of the pants. What's wrong with getting an erection and letting people know about it? Why is this included at all? This is one of those, I'm just holding out. Both of these are true. Let's just say Eldridge Cleaver in this fashion gambit, and then William Sullivan found dead suspiciously before he's going to testify about what he knows about some of these deaths. Which do you think is more important to include? Because you can't include everything in the book, right? Which do you think is more important? Which do you think is more relevant to what we've read in this book thus far? Zing moment. Gotta focus on the penis of the black male, even when it's not even really relevant to what we're talking about here. Like if you just say it's a cute anecdote to add in, I think it's way more important, relevant, significant. William Sullivan's death. That's just me, though. I could be wrong. Let's see. Make sure I didn't miss, folks. If you have commentary to share, do not wait until the last minute. We'll go ahead and get to audio segment number 2, and then we'll read the rest of our emails and see if folks have additional commentary to share as we get ready to close in on the end of the book. Not quite there today, but we are getting close. Audio segment number 2, Katherine Massey Book Club. Tonight, we bombed the U.S. Capitol. Audio segment number 2.
Laura's ideological commitments grew stronger even as the Vietnam War wound down and the anti-war movement all but disappeared. Laura valorized the United States' enemies in Southeast Asia, who'd outfought and outlasted what she saw as an imperialist monster. She revered the women of Vietnam, particularly those who had served in combat roles fighting the Americans. In July 1975, just months after Vietnam had fallen to the Communists, she got a chance for a first-hand look at the country. The pilgrimage, which included Laura and 3 other female anti-imperialist activists, was organized by the Vietnam Women's Union, founded in 1930 to contribute to anti-feudalism and anti-imperialism movements led by the Communist Party to struggle for the power of the people. At the request of their hosts, the American activists evaded the U.S. embargo on material aid to Vietnam and smuggled in injectable Valium and other medicines. One of Laura's traveling companions, the writer Tony Cade Bambara, wrote a short story about the trip. Laura disapproved of the tale on ideological grounds. It conferred some unflattering attributes on some of the Vietnamese characters, she said. But eventually she rethought her political rigidity. Bambara's tale was not the single-mindedly heroic portrait my narrow ideology needed, of women planting rice, then rushing fearlessly to shoot down American planes using outdated weapons. During the late 1970s, living in New York, Laura continued her radical activism. She joined Madam Bin Graphics Collective, May 19th's printmaking affiliate. Soon, May 19th women reached out to her. Would you like to do more than just make posters and attend the occasional street demonstration? The women told her there was a secret formation fighting racism and imperialism, and that this group wasn't afraid to use physical force. It wasn't male-dominated like the Weather Underground. Women organized and led the group. Laura's obvious commitment to revolutionary anti-imperialism, her intelligence, and her real-life weather experience would be invaluable. Laura liked what she heard and joined their formation. Now she was part of what May 19th called the Armed Clandestine Movement. Bombings were intended to be percussive wake-up calls for the imperialists, warmongers, colonialists, and fascists. Every bomb that went off would signal to the world that they were still in the game, and that they still mattered. It was proof that an underground army was at work. And, as May 19th discovered, bombing could be morale-enhancing. Reconnaissance, target selection, emplacement, detonation, tension, and release, and a frisson of excitement. Like many other radicals who came of age in the 1960s and 70s, the women of May 19th were inspired by the writing of Frantz Fanon, the Martinique-born psychiatrist and author of The Wretched of the Earth, a powerful anti-colonial polemic. At the level of individuals, Fanon wrote, violence is a cleansing force. It frees the native from his inferiority complex and from his despair and inaction. It makes him fearless and restores his self-respect. The women experimented with various explosive concoctions and devices. It was on-the-job training, research, and development aimed at finding the right tools and creating the biggest bang for the buck, while keeping faces and fingers intact. They used Café Bustelo coffee cans to build firebombs brewed with granulated sugar, potassium chlorate, and hot water and poured into molds to set. The result was a semi-hard whitish material called fire fudge. It resembled the confection, but, as a U.S. Army field manual warned, it is poisonous and must not be eaten. They set off the fire fudge with a simple time delay mechanism, ping-pong balls or Trojan condoms filled with concentrated sulfuric acid. The corrosive liquid ate through its container, giving the firebomber plenty of time to flee. May 19th discovered a way to amp up the fire fudge by adding a material whose use by the U.S. military during the Vietnam War had earned international condemnation: jellied gasoline, better known as napalm. The women built IEDs, improvised explosive devices. The raw ingredients were cheap and readily available. They'd load an inch-wide, foot-long pipe with half a pound of smokeless powder, then seal the ends. It could pack a wallop. But they wanted something with a bigger punch. Thanks to the dynamite theft in Austin back in 1980, May 19th had plenty of high-explosive ingredients, including dynamite, blasting caps, and det cord. The Anarchist Cookbook, assorted military manuals, and DuPont's Blaster's Handbook, Practical Methods of Using Explosives for Various Purposes, offered basic bomb-making information. Though they didn't have the Internet, the texts were easily accessed at libraries, bookshops, and Army-Navy stores. But building and emplacing an explosive device took talent, technique, and tradecraft. They'd have to learn the art and the science. It was dangerous work. A bomb maker could lose her hands, her face, or even her life. How could they forget poor Willie Morales or the 3 weather people atomized in the townhouse explosion on West 11th Street? Hands-on instruction from an expert would be invaluable. Essential, in fact. Laura and Linda had been in the weather underground. They weren't experienced bombers, but they knew people who were. Kathy Wilkerson, whose father owned the West 11th Street townhouse, had been in the building during the accidental explosion and had managed to flee from the wreckage. She went on to become a weather bomb maker. She was living in New York, as was Weather's master bomb builder, Ron Fliegelman. They might be willing to give some guidance. The post-Brinks law enforcement pressure was heavy, but the May 19th women weren't going to wait around forever. "11. We are the Revolutionary Fighting Group. We need to be able to respond to the offensives of Third World struggles by an offensive of our own. The rules of attack, like all rules of war, need to be learned, and the armed clandestine is the best place to learn them." Undated May 19th paper. Some strategic premises and political changes. New York, January 1983. May 19th members figured that their first attack should be relatively low-key, something local in or around the city, a sharpener, a practice run to get their operational skills into shape. No casualties, just a big bang. Post-attack, they'd use a ferocious-sounding nom de guerre to scare the fascists and imperialists. Up front in the New York City telephone directory, there were blue pages listing federal, state, and local government offices. The FBI's New York field office was in a 41-story slab-like building downtown at 26 Federal Plaza. By that time, FBI offices in places such as Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York were locked down tight. Laura, Susan, Linda, Marilyn, and their friends knew this. They'd tangled with the FBI in the past, when they'd been involved in SDS, Weather Underground, and the BLA. During the Bureau's frantic but ultimately unsuccessful coast-to-coast hunt for weather fugitives during the 1970s, left-wing agitators of all kinds had been hauled in for questioning. One particular incident in 1971 had pushed the FBI toward increasing security. On a night in March, anti-war activists crowbarred their way into a tiny two-man satellite office in Media, Pennsylvania. The burglars had successfully counted on the fact that the office would be empty because it was the night of the Muhammad Ali-Joe Frazier fight of the century, and most Americans would be at home, glued to their TV sets or radios. The thieves made off with reams of bureau files that documented the FBI's decades of snooping and disinformation directed against the New Left, black radicals, communists, and the Ku Klux Klan, known collectively as COINTELPRO, the Bureau abbreviation for Counterintelligence Program. COINTELPRO was all about penetration and disruption, just like operations against adversary intelligence services. The media activists shared their COINTELPRO gleanings with reporters. It was pre-internet WikiLeaks. A wave of public protest followed, with most of the abuse falling on the head of J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI's aging and increasingly legacy-conscious director. Hoping to tighten things up, Hoover shuttered many of the Bureau's small, resident agencies, but not all of them. The New York phone book listed another FBI office, tucked away in a federal building at 45 Bay Street in the St. George section of Staten Island. An added bonus, it also housed Navy and Air Force recruiting stations. May 19th did a little reconnaissance. They strolled right in. The place was a real Sleepy Hollow. The FBI office was on the second floor. They noted the women's bathroom conveniently located just across the hall. The setting seemed ideal for their plans. On January 28, 1983, a woman and a man walked into the building at 45 Bay Street. Witnesses later told the FBI that she was about 35, roughly 5 feet 5 inches tall with a medium complexion. He was described as a white male, 25 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, with dirty blonde hair, a mustache, and a slim build. The bomb they'd built was a little bulky, but it didn't seem to draw any attention. The woman found a hiding spot in the upstairs bathroom, and then the pair slipped out of the building. At 10:30 that night, the thing went off, a huge blast followed by burst pipes and cascading water. At 9:10 the next morning, the news desk at United Press International received a call. It was a taped message. "We bombed the FBI office on Staten Island. They are the political police. They are responsible for attacks in the United States and around the world. Death to traitors. Free political prisoners. We are the Revolutionary Fighting Group. Everything went exactly according to plan. May 19th started mapping out fresh attacks. It considered a new theater of operations, maybe somewhere closer to the heart of the American state. Part of the fallout from the Brinks job was that every public May 19th meeting, rally, and gathering seemed to draw law enforcement scrutiny. Men in windbreakers and bucket hats standing around outside, trying to look inconspicuous. Strange hissing noises and clicking sounds came through on the telephone. Lots of wrong numbers. It seemed as though somebody wanted to find out whether they were at home. It was obvious that the cops had Madam Bin under surveillance. Suspicions were confirmed on January 3, 1983, when cops hit the studio on Taft Place in Brooklyn and said they were looking for Donna Borup, who'd been on the run ever since she'd jumped bail after the JFK fracas. The FBI men tossed the place and hauled off loads of leftist literature and artwork, but found no traces of their peripatetic target. Madam Bin looked for a new home, someplace less well known to the authorities. The women found one across the Hudson River at 665 Newark Street in Jersey City. A woman Judy Clark had lived with on West 98th Street in Manhattan ran the collective's day-to-day operations. They continued to crank out agitprop artwork supporting their favorite causes, including Puerto Rican revolution. It didn't take much time for the Bureau to discover Madam Bin's new home, and before long, heavy law enforcement surveillance was underway. Revolving teams of agents with mustaches, sideburns, and tight trousers clocked their comings and goings. Black wall-tired surveillance sedans abounded. And there was nighttime rummaging in the garbage cans outside, either the cops or the FBI, or both, doing what they called trash runs. Government probes weren't confined to the New York area. May 19th members in Chicago reported that cops were snapping photos at demonstrations, showing up at public meetings, and writing down license plate numbers, just as the Bureau and the Chicago Police Force's anti-radical Red Squad had done in the 1960s and early 70s. May 19th concluded that if they were going to survive and continue the armed struggle, there was only one way forward. They'd have to go on a wartime footing, disappear from sight, pick new identities, cut off contact with friends, family, loved ones, and political comrades. It would be like living the life of a fugitive. But although Marilyn, Susan, and Alan were on the wanted list, they certainly didn't see themselves as criminals. Ordinary crooks were in the underworld. Marilyn, Susan, and Alan were in the underground. Linda, Betty Ann, and Tim now had no choice but to join them. Writing in 1943, two former members of the anti-Nazi resistance in Germany described the power of the all-seeing, scientific surveillance of a modern police state. You couldn't hide from it, they said, but you could deceive it. And the best way to do that was to live as ordinary a life as possible. The more you resemble a normal, everyday citizen in every respect, they wrote, the less apt you are to be suspected. And as long as you do not arouse suspicion and scrupulously observe a long series of rules of caution, you may be able to carry on underground work for years on end. Once you are suspected, even catacombs will not help. There was more. Maintain in all circumstances the appearance that you are the same as other people, that you have an ordinary job, the former resistance members advised. This turned out to be excellent advice. May 19th hid in plain sight, attired in pantsuits, dad jeans, flannel shirts, mama skirts over aqua-colored panties, purple scarves, corduroy jackets. They held down ordinary jobs, working as printers, technicians, and office clerks, work that was mainstream and anonymous, and not particularly well paid, but enough to scratch out a living. Typically, the gigs had well-defined, regular hours, which made it easier to allocate time for the armed struggle. Grinding it out underground was a major challenge. The subterranean diet was pretty terrible. Ex-weatherwoman Kathy Wilkerson described her intake during the 1970s. Oatmeal, candy, donuts, coffee, the occasional egg or grilled cheese sandwich, and red wine and bourbon, as well as endless cigarettes. The most important requirement of underground life was security. Without it, an operative would end up dead or in jail. When asked about her subterranean years, Marilyn kept her mouth shut, telling one interviewer only, "It is hard to say very much without getting specific, and that I cannot do. I suspect that is something the state repressive apparatus would read with great interest." But good security was cumbersome and laborious, and it came at a cost. The underground lifestyle was anything but glamorous. Everything one took for granted above ground needed to be acquired with risky, painstaking effort. There were disguises, Mrs. Doubtfire-style glasses, wigs, dye jobs. Sometimes Susan dressed like an old woman. "We laughed when the first time we dyed our hair it turned orange, a long-honored tradition of underground participants around the world," she said. The color was called underground orange because it would take several attempts to get the color right. The May 19th cells built a complex security infrastructure, multiple information relay points, false identification, code names, and frequent relocation. In clandestine work, noted the anonymous author of one internal May 19th paper, sloppiness, laziness, and inattention to detail are all forms of opportunism and are dangerous. At all times, the author insisted, science and seriousness must be applied to developing correct methodology. They typed out handbooks, meticulous, exhaustive, even obsessive, just like everything else May 19th did. Intellectuals hunched over typewriters, writing and rewriting, peer-reviewing, critiquing. Members relied on a document called Rules of Security and Operations for in-depth advice, guidance, and regulations for preventing the fatal blows that had doomed other unspecified revolutionary organizations of the continent. It was essential to protect the organization, its combatants, its secrets, documents, arms, and other instruments of work. May 19th's ability to carry out operations hinged on the group's ability to safeguard itself. Without such measures, its members would end up like those of the BLA or the FALN, dead or behind bars. A central tenet, secrecy. No blabbing to outsiders, of course. It was essential to maintain the most rigorous silence. Everything was on a compartmentalized, need-to-know basis. No mingling with outsiders. Another principle was being punctual and never missing a meeting, as they were hard enough to arrange. But don't show up early, and if somebody fails to appear within 10 minutes of the scheduled time, call off the meeting. Always think about a line of retreat ahead of time. And if the cops show up, you might have to undertake armed maneuvers in order to get out of there. Always assume the authorities are listening. If you need to talk inside, crank up the radio. The phones are probably tapped, so try to use a payphone. May 19th had inventories of public phone numbers and locations all over town. There was a cluster of 15 on the east side alone. Each phone was assigned a name, such as Agnes's, 87th Street and 2nd Avenue, Southeast Corner, 534-9574, Bernie's, 79th and 2nd, Southeast Corner, 744-9824, Carol's, 74th and 2nd, Southeast Corner, 650-1302, Doug's, 70th and 2nd, Southwest Corner, 650-1289, and so on. If Marilyn wanted to talk to Judy securely, they might make arrangements for Agnes to call Carol at a certain time and date. If they didn't connect, the protocol was that they were to try again an hour later, this time using the next name on the list. Marilyn would move on to Bernie's at 79th and 2nd, and Judy would go to Doug's. The system was clunky and time-consuming, but it reduced the chance of government eavesdropping. It was like Moscow Rules novelist John le Carré's fictional tradecraft for spies. Never forget you're operating in hostile territory. Everybody had aliases and nom de guerre, memorable but not too distinctive. Bess J. Lunderman, Loretta Polo, Betty Ann, Barbara Groden, Susan Knoll, Susan, Milagros Matese, Laura, Louise Harmon, Eve Mancuso, Dee, Marilyn, Alex, Judy, Christine Porter, Louise Robinette, Katherine Orloff, Linda, Leonard Cohen, William Lunderman, Kenneth Abrams, Alan, and William Bassler, William J. Hammond, Tim. It was good OPSEC to rotate aliases from time to time, but it took discipline and practice to remember to use the right name. May 19th needed identification documents, the most essential tools for surviving in the underground. Library cards were a start, but much more important were Social Security cards, anchor documents that they could use as the foundation for a phony persona. With a Social Security card, you could get credit cards and a driver's license, rent an apartment, even land a passport. How to get one? There was the dead baby method. Record-keeping was less digitized and much more lax back in the early 1980s. Social Security cards weren't issued at birth the way they are today. You'd look at old obituaries or gravestones and find somebody who was born around the time you were but had died young, before he or she applied for a Social Security card. Then you'd get a copy of the birth certificate, a public record. With the right gear and skills, you could even make your own. Or you could skip the whole process and print some phony Social Security cards. You'd have to make up the numbers, of course, but unless a suspicious clerk at the Department of Motor Vehicles or some other place where you were applying for something went through the arduous process of verifying them, you were free and clear. Life underground was draining, and moreover it was tedious, being constantly on guard, doing counter-surveillance, being underemployed in a crappy job. An Italian terrorist, Giorgio, spoke of the grinding boredom of his subterranean existence. I imagine that few wars or guerrilla campaigns or armed uprisings, call it what you like, have required the level of drudge work, routine, or rat race that is so much a part of ours. Washington, D.C., August 17th to 18th, 1983. Built in 1799, the Washington Navy Yard, in D.C.'s gritty southeast quadrant, is one of the country's oldest military installations. During its heyday, personnel at the site built naval guns, repaired ships, did scientific research, and even made the massive gears for the Panama Canal. Some of the original laborers there were enslaved Africans. In the decades after the Second World War, the yard evolved into a largely administrative center, including back-office activities such as the Naval Command System's support activity. In the early 1980s, computers with any real power were massive contraptions, and the Navy had regional data automation centers in 9 places around the country to do data processing. The one at the Navy Yard was in Building 196, a hulking 4-story factory-like brick structure. Hundreds of people, both civilian and military, worked inside. Just as at Fort McNair and the FBI office on Staten Island, security at the Navy Yard was light, gates and guards and fences, but at most nothing more than an ID check. It wasn't hard to wander in and out, not like the Pentagon, where you needed a badge or a visitor's pass. May 19th thought the center did computing for the Naval War College up in Newport, Rhode Island. Newport was where the Navy ran big war games, simulating massive battles and practicing to sacrifice the lives of millions on behalf of the ruling class. May 19th believed they could do some significant sabotage against the imperialist enterprise with an attack on the Navy Yard. May 19th rigged up a device, a DuPont electric blasting cap, a couple of 9-volt batteries, 2 pocket watches to serve as timers, pin socket connectors, blue, orange, and red wires linking the parts, and the key ingredient, dynamite, wrapped in black plastic tape. The bomb had what the U.S. military called a dual firing circuit, that is, 2 independent firing systems, both electric or both non-electric, so that the firing of either system will detonate all charges. In other words, there was less chance of its being a dud. On August 17th, May 19th members carried it into the Navy Yard in a blue duffel bag and placed it beside the air conditioning unit next to Building 196. A Navy duty officer got a call at 11:56 p.m. A tape recording of a middle-aged man's voice came over the line. "Clear out. There's a bomb inside the computer center." At 12:04 a.m., there was a loud blast. The explosion rocked the building and created a huge mess. A worker was knocked out of his chair, but nobody was killed or wounded. At 12:15 a.m., reporters at the Washington Post and United Press International received phone calls. Another pre-recorded message, the voice of a middle-aged man announcing that there'd been an attack. Later, there was a communique. "Build a revolutionary resistance movement. Fight U.S. imperialism."
Is this white people who are not racist? We will resume. This is chapter 11, so we are boogieing on through the text. Probably have 3, 4 weeks before we're done. Guessing. About 2/3 of the way through the book. Any hoodles. Katherine, Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. The number to dial, 720-716-7300. The code, 564-943. Pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The number again, 720-716-7300. The code, 564-943. Pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Make sure I go back and get the remainder of the email. I was trying to finish here. Let's see. Left off in chapter 10. Alrighty, number 11 in chapter 10. July 1975. At the request of their host, the American activists evaded the U.S. embargo on material aid to Vietnam and smuggled injectable Valium and other medicines. Interesting, since Valium is also a drug associated with abuse. That might be one of the ones in the opioid. I guess that's better than bombing buildings. That is, I don't know if that's enough for me to say not all white people is racist, but that's better than bombing buildings. So, and that even is kind of like, I think they made movies about that, because that's kind of like a mission type thing. Like, that's the most constructive thing that you could think of. Like, all the non-white people that you had to pass en route to doing that, Like, again, this is way more constructive than bombs, but like, dang. Peanut butter sandwich to the black people that you passed en route to get into Vietnam to do all this smuggling? Anyway, 12. Tori Cade Bambara. Laura disapproved of the tale on ideological grounds. I think Tori is incorrect. Her first name is Tony. I think that is correct as well. I don't know whose error that is, if that's William Rosenau or, if the people got it incorrect or whatever, but it is Tony. Originally known as Milton Merkin Cade, African-American author, documentary filmmaker, social activist, college professor. I suspect Miss Bambara was just trying to write an accurate article. Georgia Writers Hall of Fame, University of Georgia inductee, 2013. Number 13. Women of May 19 were inspired by the writings of Frantz Fanon. At the level of individuals, Fanon wrote, "Violence is a cleansing force. It frees the native from his inferiority complex and from his despair and inaction. It makes him fearless and restores his self-respect." See the Katherine Massey Book Club selection, Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. Gus T at that time said, worst book ever. Now we have read, unfortunately, worse since then. Alice Sebold. But either way, I'm not surprised that people that would engage in such nonsense and folly, and even the C word that I used before, confusion. Wretched of the Earth is not a text that I would point to and say, hey, if you want to get clarity, scientific clarity about what it means to be classified as white and the global system of white supremacy racism, you should read Wretched of the Earth. And even what they said about the so-called cleansing force of violence and how it rescues the native, I suspect meaning non-white, from or it restores the non-white person's self-respect. One, I point to the great Neely Fuller Jr. I'm just pointing out the difference. He and both Dr. Welsing, they talk about self-respect is not lying to yourself. not bopping a white person upside the head. I also point out quickly, because frequently non-white people say that the problem is that we have been chumps and we have not knocked a white person upside the head, ostensibly to get our self-respect back or whatever else. And I say, hey, there are huge numbers of examples of counter-violence where it was correct, a black person exhorting counter-violence against someone classified as white. Way more than Denmark Vesey or Nat Turner is ton. They just got a documentary film about Joan Little, a black female who killed a white enforcement officer who was trying to rape her, and she was exonerated for that and what have you. Is tons. In Kosi Thondaway, this more recent example, Mark Essex, I think he was mentioned in the book before, like, is tons of examples, more than you could even imagine, especially when you go worldwide. Like, it's tons of examples. Thus far, none of these acts have replaced white supremacy with justice, and I don't even know if they have done any so-called cleansing or self-respect. I have no idea. Anyway, no fan of Wretched of the Earth. 14, May 19th, discovered a way to amp up the fire fudge by adding a material whose use by the U.S. military during the Vietnam War had earned international condemnation, jellied gasoline, better known as napalm. There is a famous photograph from the Vietnam era of a 9-year-old Vietnamese girl, Kim Phuc, running naked through the streets of Vietnam after being burned in a napalm attack. The story behind it was released as a documentary on Netflix like a couple days ago. 15, Netflix, everything. 15, The Anarchist Cookbook. Assorted military manuals and DuPont's Blaster's Handbook, practical methods of using explosives for various purposes, offered basic bomb-making information. Though they didn't have the internet, the texts were easily accessed at libraries, bookshops, and Army, Navy stores. See the C.O.W.S Book Club, Columbine. I told you we got a long history of those bombings. White bombers. Dave Cullen, documentarian, Anarchist Cookbook author, was filled with remorse. Oh, I saw that. I watched that when we were watching Columbine, because he didn't know, all of this. Like he says, they sent it. I think he said they sent him the reports of the Columbine. Oh no! Like anyway. William Powell, who renounced his notorious bomb-making guide, The Anarchist Cookbook, dies at 66. Washington Post, 2017. Powell wrote the text at the age of 19. The DuPont book has been published in various forms for the past century and is now in its 18th edition. There does not seem to be any controversy with its publication. It seems to be a trade manual and not a subversive text, as opposed to the Anarchist book. One thing that I've noted is, we've had white guests on the program, and I've said, hey man, like, is there any effort? Because they come out and say, well, we got to ban the hate you give. Matter of fact, the University of Washington, I think I slacked on my game a little bit. They had a whole book on subversive text. I mentioned it before. It's only right that I mention it in the Katherine Massey Book Club right now. They have a whole exhibit that's been up for months. I've walked by it probably 100 times at this point, because it's been up for months. But they have an exhibit, and it's about subversive books, banned books, and efforts to get these books out of schools and all the rest of it. And I tell you, at least, I'm going to say at least 5 of these books we have read on the Katherine Massey Book Club, like The Hate You Give and 1984 and The Bluest Eye. It's I would have to go back and write down the whole list, because it's a big exhibit. But man, I have asked people like I don't remember the Anarchist Cookbook being up there at all. All of the trouble that the Poor Man's James Bond, that's another one. I think we got that one with Michael Swango. But we've asked guests, like, do you recall, has there been any effort, to get that one out of here? Like, hey man, we've had one too many of these Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold and Tim McVeigh. Forget all this. You're going to do something constructive. Get you a book about growing cucumbers, tomatoes, cleanse your colon. We don't need to get we don't need no more pipe bombs. Nope. I've asked tons of white people that. We gonna ban anarchist cookbook? Nope. I swear I'm gonna have to go back and look at the banned book list exhibit that they got, but I do not remember seeing that book on there at all. I told you Toni Morrison. Yep. The Hate You Give, that's another one I said. The Hate You Give, way worse than Wretched of the Earth. That was up there. Get that one on out of here. Anarchist Cookbook. I believe in freedom to read. You want to make pipe bomb? Come on. Or the Turner Diaries. That one wasn't up there either. I'm going to have to go back. I hope they don't take it down. I have to go back and look again. Let's see. 16. Weather's master bomb builder Ron Fliegelman. He was never convicted or spent a day in jail. Echo, echo, echo. I thought we heard that before. In 2015, Mr. Fliegelman says, I am proud of what I did. Tough, I love it, brother. Stand by your work. Meet the Weather Underground's bomb guru, Vanity Fair Brian Burrow, 2015. A high school teacher who spent 25 years in the classroom is revealed as bomb. Get out of here. Get out. How was he working with children? I'm done. How what in the Sioux Africa? That's exactly what I'm talking about. If this master bomb maker had been Negro Jim, how is he I guess you can say they did say there was a black dude who, had done whatever, was accused of whatever, the Black Panthers got his life together and went on the land. But I mean, they didn't say he was making bombs. Just wow. I mean, wow. Just wow. 25 years in the classroom, teaching science, I bet. Revealed as bomb maker. Maybe it's Walter White. He's making crystal meth this time, too. For far left group who wanted to overthrow the American government. This is in 2015. Chapter 11. The burglars had successfully counted on the fact that the once would be empty because it was the night of the Muhammad Ali Joe Frazier fight of the century, and most Americans would be at home glued to their TV sets or radios. I think the author is technically incorrect. The fight could only be seen in the U.S. on pay-per-view. Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, man. He is switching it up. This is way bigger. You didn't have no Netflix and on-demand viewing and paper. You didn't have all of that. You had to have a satellite. You probably had to go to the bar, listen on the radio, or watch in person. But I don't think this would have been one where you could have been glued to, you would have been glued someplace, but you would not have been glued to your TV set at home. Let's see. The fight could only be seen in the review. Closed circuit TV in theaters where tickets were sold. 2.5 million tickets. Moreover, there was no live radio. Oh, you couldn't even do radio. No live radio broadcast of the fight in the U.S. There were some radio broadcasts giving round-by-round updates, but this was not widely available. There were riots at some venues due to technical issues with the broadcast. Wow. I got to go upside your head because I can't see my... and Joe Frazier go upside. Wow, that is embarrassing. They need to get rid of boxing immediately. I saw in subsequent years a fight on one of these closed circuit hookups in an arena, and the picture was not that great. That is very true, though. You cannot be, this is 60 years ago at this point? Or about 50 years, a little over 50 years ago, 54 years ago at this point. They would not have been at home. They would have been out. Get it correct. Occupied for sure, but not at their house. 2, the thieves made off with reams of bureau files that documented decades of FBI snooping and disinformation directed against the New Left, Black Radicals, Communists, and the KKK, known collectively as the COINTELPRO, the Bureau's abbreviation for Counterintelligence Program. The media activists shared their COINTELPRO gleanings with reporters. It was revealed that the FBI was doing surveillance on Muhammad Ali and held records on him dating back to his childhood. Muhammad Ali helped to expose Hoover's FBI and today's empty tributes. This is from 2016 after he passed. 3. Ordinary crooks were in the underworld. Marilyn, Susan, and Alan were in the underground. An example of the skillful use of word by racists. This is what I was thinking when I asked, are these folks terrorists? No. Our guest this week said this down in Puerto Rico. He said, no, these are William Morales and them. They not no terrorists. They out fighting for a cause. They working against injustice. They working against racism. They not no terrorists. What? I thought they were going to blow up the dance, man. Come on. We not criminals. See, we not a part of the underworld. We part of the underground. It's a difference, see. What? Come on. Boy, grinding it out underground was a major challenge. I almost felt like they should have said major bummer, man. Subterranean diet was terrible. Oatmeal, candy, donuts, coffee. Incidentally, just my opinion, if you can get candy and donuts, you could probably take the money that you put to get all that junk food together and get some healthy victuals. I'm just saying. Anyway, the occasional egg or grilled cheese sandwich, and red wine and bourbon. Same thing with the red wine and bourbon. You could probably pool the money that you're spending on liquor and put that into getting something constructive to eat. As well as endless cigarettes. Same thing. The most important requirement of underground life was security. The underground lifestyle was anything but glamorous. There were disguises, the Miss Doubtfire wig, and all the rest. I don't know. This does not seem to be such difficult conditions when compared to the conditions of millions of non-white victims who have no choice in how they live. Facts. Matter of fact, pause for Devontae. If he had got regular access to grilled cheese, donuts, oatmeal, an occasional egg, I ain't even say every day. Come on. That would have been an upgrade for him. Like, wow, I ain't got to go and beg the neighbors for tortillas, man. Like, we came up, man. If I got enough oatmeal for my siblings, man, that's a good day. Delectable Negro. Matter of fact, Devontae, we're going to put you aside for a second. You still important, my black brother. We just put you aside for a second. Forget him. For us right now in 2026, you can afford to eat an egg every day? Oh, my God. They've been whining for about 3 years. But, man, egg costs you $10. Like, ooh, man, we can't afford no egg. Like, egg, Jesus Christ. What are you talking about, the grilled cheese sandwich? Come on, man. Delectable Negro. You eating way better than lots of black people who got food deserts and Family Dollar and still got red wine and cigarettes to boot. 5. They typed out handbooks, meticulous, exhaustive, even obsessive. A central tenet, secrecy. No blabbing to outsiders. Maintain the most rigorous silence. No mingling with outsiders. Another principle was being punctual. He writes, this seems like an example of codification. I would agree. And for sure, I appreciate being punctual. I mean, hey, time is important. None of us has extra time. And not doing a lot of unnecessary talking. I think that is so important. If you are doing serious things, there's no need to just be running off at the mouth and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and all that. Shh. Love it. Have a code if you're trying to do something serious, especially even if it's allegedly against racism. Let's see. 6. Built in 1799, the Washington Navy Yard in D.C.'s gritty southeast quadrant. What does that mean? It's one of the country's oldest military installations. This section of Washington, D.C. is also known as Anacostia, named after the river that runs through the area. The river is notorious for how it is polluted with raw sewage. The mind is a terrible thing to waste. 90% of the people in the Anacostia region of Washington, D.C. are classified as white. Describing it as gritty may be a subtle way of saying that a lot of non-white people live in the area. However, this number may be declining due to population dislocation of non-white victims. On Dr. Cress-Welsing, that's what I was thinking. Like, it may have been so-called gritty before, but it ain't doing no gritty now. Dislocate you right on. We got property taxes and all. You better be Justin Jefferson. You think you're gonna afford to live over here now? Let's see. 7. Keeping on the move is good security hygiene. May 19th decided to relocate. They clustered in Connecticut, most to New Haven, scruffy environs of Yale. Describing New Haven as scruffy may also be a subtle way of saying that a lot of non-white people live in the area. 2020 census, 134,020 people, 27.6% white, 30.4% black, 30.64% Latino, Hispanic. Yeah, that is scruffy. In 2011, it was named the 4th most dangerous city in the U.S. Yikes. Yikes. I'll stop there. We didn't get through all of chapter 11. Alrighty. Let's see. You have commentary, *61. Don't wait till the last minute, and then I'll get to some of my notes as well. Let's see. Go backwards a little bit. Okay. The end of chapter 10. Make sure I didn't go too far. Okay. Okay, they talked about the doctored passports, and they can help you get out of the country. I went too far. Sorry. The master bomber, Ron Fiegelman, we just heard about him. I even thought that title was beyond the whole slave component of it. Like, dang, like, do we have master gardeners? Master teachers? Like something constructive. We got a master bomb builder. And of course he's white. Like, did you write the edit and update to the anarchist cookbook or what have you? Like, come on. Let's see. Just all of this, the anarchist cookbook. I cannot believe that we have circled back to this again. And I think from the point that we read about the anarchist cookbook in Columbine, I think we've read about this now in other texts. I'd have to go back and look at some of the books, but I don't know if it was in Michael Swango. Like I said, I know the Poor Man's James Bond, where he was talking about different poisons and all that, and ways to kill people on the sly. That was mentioned there too, but I think it's come up in other texts where I just say white culture, sitting around and thinking about ways both to kill people and sitting about thinking of things to blow up and or thinking of ways to make bombs. Like, man, that's come on. How many do we have any black people you owned the anarchist cookbook and or we done sat around and been blowing up that, like, man, we was 17, my parents went out of town for the weekend or what had it, boy, we done almost set the whole backyard on fire. Was that you? That was not me. I did not have no anarchist cookbook, nor did I have any desire. I do not remember ever having an inkling of I need to go and get, some sort of explosive device of some sort and, blow up, something, go out in the woods and blow something up or what? Never, never, never. Let's see. And to see the same text come up again, like just something about all of that, just white culture. Something about them including so-called black radicals, because they call Dr. King a radical. That's what I'm saying, like to have so-called black and that really just means black. Black. You didn't have to do anything incorrect. You didn't have to be so-called radical. You could just be, hey, I'm a black person and I don't think racism should get radical. Get a father. So, I mean, to have black so-called radical next to the Ku Klux Klan, like, are you serious? Like, Jesus. These folks are going out bombing people and killing folks, and then you got black people who are just saying, hey, can we get justice? Radical, put file right next to like, wow. Let's see. And never mind. So much I can say about that. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, Racial Matters. Go back, archives. Let's see. They said the so-called modern police state, you couldn't hide from it. You could deceive it. And the best way to do that was to live as ordinary a life as possible. The more you resemble a normal everyday citizen in every respect, they wrote, the less apt you are to be suspected. As long as you do not arouse suspicion and scrupulously observe a long series of rules of caution, you may be able to carry on underground work for years on end. I said, man, even everything just about that one word, ordinary. Ordinary. You could deceive it. The best way to do that was live an ordinary. In this context, I think that means white. If you just look like an ordinary white person, because really all of the things that they said, you could just be a white person. Just put on, just, don't stand out in any way. Don't get purple hair and, have a lot of gaudy, jewelry or anything like that. Just wear a suit, get a haircut, shave, get a job, put your glasses on, look like you're going about a regular routine where you go to work, you go home, you get your food or what have you, go to bed, you get up. They don't see you out being rowdy and this, that, and hanging out on the street corner and talking, drawing a lot of attention to yourself. Just be a regular white person. That does not work as well if you are classified as black. We read Johnny Cochran. He was an attorney, so he was doing all that. I'm not dressed funny. I wear clothes like a normal person. I have a normal job. I was working as a prosecuting attorney. Said I was pulled over. I had my children in the car. That's about as normal as it gets. Go to work, pick up my children, and go home. They pulled me over at gunpoint in my suit. It does not work. Except be ordinary. You can be doing ordinary, regular, not drawing attention to myself, and classified as black. It would not, especially you doing radical, not going to work as easily at all trying to be an ordinary Negro and not get in trouble. Let's see. Although I have heard Mr. Fuller say something very similar, where he said people that he saw who were engaged in some sort of criminal activity, narcotic peddling of some sort or the like, he said that they did that similar. They had a code, and a big part of it was do not draw attention. The people who got away with this successfully for a long time, they generally were not in big crowds out on the street and talking real loud and loud vehicle with the radio blaring and all that. Like, just you'd see them quick if they were in passing or what have you. They're going about their business, boop, and then gone. Very important. Not trying to, if you're already going to have all eyes on you, you do not need to draw any extra attention. They said the most important requirement of underground life was security. Without it, an operative would end up dead or in jail. When asked about her Mediterranean years, Marilyn kept her mouth shut, telling one interviewer only it's hard to say very much without getting specific, and that I cannot do. When they said security, I just thought, man, if you're classified as black, there is no such thing. Like, you can move, relocate. Where are you going to go? You might end up relocating to a sundown town, racially restricted region. What would that even mean, security? Are you going to go stay with other black people? Even if you go stay with other black people who are not radicals, man, you're going to be so-called secure? Let's see. All the code names and such that they, but some of this does seem kind of like, what did he call it? Insurgent mischief, where they're just kind of, it's thrilling and you can have fun and pretend that you're doing, this real important, effort and all the rest of it. Some of it definitely seems like that, because we can make up code names and all the rest of it. Like, it seems like that could definitely be a part of all of this. Let's see. I definitely appreciate being punctual, though. Let's see. They had just the time and energy required to track down or to codify all of the locations of where the pay telephones are. One, that wouldn't even be possible in 2026. Man, they have practically no pay phones unless you're in Los Angeles. That's about the only place that I've been that they have a large number of pay telephones. But yeah, that wouldn't even be possible in most places in the U.S. at this point. But to at that time go and codify the locations of where all of the cellular phones are and the numbers, and then we codify, different nicknames for all of the phones and all of that, and then, how we contact each other, like, that is just, wow. That is a lot. That is a lot. That will require a lot of time and energy. Let's see, and then it was easier to fake government documents. You could fake your own social security cards at that time. Man, and they talked about that with the passports too, driver's license. Like, man, if you are a white person at that time with a little bit of skill, and he said the know-how, you're white, so you're going to arouse less suspicion. Like, oh my God, you can be printing out. That could be like a whole industry, just making fake driver's licenses, which I guess it was for. That's why they had to get, real ID and everything, so they say. Anyway, my notes for this week, make sure I did not miss anyone. Let's see. Hopefully, people will check some of what has been reported in the news with all of these groups, the Turtle Island Liberation Front and all the rest of it. Legnan down in Louisiana, the fella that they suspect out for the DC January 6th. Hopefully people will see some of these events and maybe, that is very much related to what we're reading about here. But anywho, we'll be here Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Compensatory call-in, catch up on news and tidbits from the past 7 days. Hopefully worthy of folks' Friday evening. Say again, sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. You got white people going out doing bombs and everything else. Yes, you want to be lucid, alert, in case you got to run for your life. Creator, we ask that you remind us, this book notwithstanding, stop saying not all white people are racist. Remind us, stop name calling people classified as black. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Gal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.